thought I'd let you get it out first.
There we go.
Get it out of your system.
YouTube allows 2 or 3 F-bombs
Oh, really? I wondered what the
per
standard was.
episode or something like that. But I guess somebody I was watching was talking about how you can't say or drop an F-bomb though until you're like past the 3-minute mark because of the way that they set up the algorithms. If you drop bombs in the first 3 minutes of your video, it kind of skews one way. So you kind of gonna push it down the road. I don't know. To each his own. But,
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah. Morning, Paul.
There's Paul. Private chat. Who's in the private chat? Add me in. Hello. Oh, that's you.
That's me, baby. We've been hacked.
I just got the email, so others will get their notification now too.
Good.
YouTube.
Today we're going to dive back into Dreher.
Yeah, but we haven't started recording yet.
I know, but I'm just talking to Paul. And
We're talking to
up.
Paul. Okay. Hi, Paul.
Since we're just shooting the breeze till people show up, and it's our Monday morning debrief, because we used to do it on Mondays.
It's true. I think it's better on
just-
Friday, actually.
Yeah, I always have that post-Sunday hangover on Monday morning. And
Just tired. Tired of talking.
yeah, that too.
I'm kind of tired of the week already, too, though. I don't know. Is there a good time? There's just no good time.
I don't know. My week's chopped up into increments anyways. So I have a Monday through Wednesday schedule, and then I have a Thursday through Saturday schedule, and then I have a Sunday schedule. So I have kind of 3 increments to my week. But once again, I'm on my soapbox about Christians abandoning the civil estate because it's safe and harmless. And we were talking before we went live that Christians, especially the last 5 or 6 generations, Christians can't make up their mind whether they want to throw themselves into the lions in the arena and suffer, or whether they want to run into the desert to escape suffering. And I think
I
what
said
it comes
that, didn't I? That's
you
right.
did say that. I do listen to you once in a while.
Wow.
And I think what it comes down to is just like giving stuff up for Lent, Christians
Right.
are content to suffer so long as it is comfortable and convenient. And for the past 5 or 6 generations, because the church has been in the pocket of the state by and large, we've been able to choose our suffering. And this comes out, of course, in our complaints about the culture wars and how, especially since the 60s and 70s, the church was pushed out of the public square and its voice was ignored. And so we cry, this is persecution and this is culture attacking the church.
I got banned on social media.
Yeah, I got banned on social media. And
You mean fake reality? Yes. Okay.
versus being arrested and having your church literally, locked up with chains and police
Or
stationed in
burned.
the park, or burned, or just what's coming as far as this medical apartheid that we're now, going into, and the tyranny that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
And-
multifaceted. It's not just medical, right? I mean,
No, it's not.
all sorts of things.
And I was thinking about this morning, even in relation to Washington State, which is now constructing and hiring people to work in concentration camps.
Although I will make a note on this. I didn't want to do it on the Telegram, or I didn't get to it yet. Which is that apparently they're always hiring. National Guard
Yeah.
has like a perennial order for people. Like
Right.
they're always prepared for quarantine, pandemic.
Correct. Well, last year, Ohio was doing it. I think Virginia was doing it last year, or West Virginia.
Right.
It's not just Washington State, but Washington State is getting traction right now because people are freaking out about the mandates.
I mean, FEMA has standing authority
do.
to do that all the time
Right.
too. Yeah.
But also with what has developed in Australia.
Right.
people
We know
are-
that this is maybe something a little bit more serious.
Right. And I was thinking, though, if you're a pastor, for example, in the state of Washington, and you see these things, and maybe you do your due diligence and you drive around, you go for a day trip and you go and look at these sites and you say to yourself, okay, they're actually building these things and they're actually hiring people for these sites. How long do you stay before you say, I will not allow my children, for example, to grow up in a state that engages in this kind of tyrannical
Right, but the-
oppression of people?
But the pain, and it's not exactly suffering, but I mean, it might be depending on the housing market.
Yeah, that's true.
The pain of moving. I mean, it's not easy, and it isn't cheap. But you think about this immigrant crisis on the southern border, though, right? And you look at that, and these people pay $10,000-$15,000 to the cartels to move them,
Yeah.
from Central or South America through Mexico and then into the States. They make a pretty incredible sacrifice to try to land here compared to where they are.
Right.
Some of them obviously have malicious intent, and others, are genuinely just trying to improve their life and get
Right.
away from where they are.
Right.
I don't think that it's not legal, so I think we should still be opposed to it. But and paying the cartels to do it. I mean, wow. You got to think about what their profit margin was this year and how well they did.
We all know who profits off the cartels profiting.
You mean the people who also traffic the fentanyl from China?
That too.
In
Like,
addition
we
to
already have the
people-
receipts for the CIA. We already know how this works.
I know. I was thinking about Sicario again the other day.
We've had the receipts since the late 90s, early 2000s. We know how
I'd
the
forgotten
CIA
how
makes
much
their
better
money.
the first movie was than the second one.
Yeah. The second one was a good movie, but it wasn't a good film.
Right. Well,
Sicario
the
a
first
good
was
film.
Denis, right? Villeneuve.
Yeah. Denis. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it was
Denis.
also Roger Taylor doing the cinematography.
Oh yeah.
And that's why.
I mean, it's brilliant. Brilliant
I'll
stuff.
watch any movie that Roger Taylor does.
Right, but the second one deals with specifically, right, with the drug running across through the tunnels and whatnot. Like,
No,
wait
the
a minute,
first
this guy
one,
has
not the second one. First one.
What was the second one about?
Because the first one was that, again, he turns off the lights, so it's just ambient light, and they go down in the tunnels, and then
No, that wasn't the first
she
one.
gets
Okay.
cut off from the rest of the squad, and then he goes
Yeah.
up into that garage and shoots the cop and
That's right.
shoots her and says, "Never point a gun at me again." I may own the DVD.
Sounds like
but-
you've seen it more than once. I've seen
a
it
few
once.
times. Yeah, a few times. I've studied film criticism of this movie, breaking down the metaphors and the narratives and stuff. But because you're there, it's your day off. What are you going to do? Go down a rabbit hole of film criticism and learn more about meta narratives.
I mean, there's plenty of expose, whether it's fictional, or told in through fiction, or just straight up, including the poppy harvest and all of that.
That too. Well, I mean, that's another thing. We should post Evan Hafer's rant on the
Oh, yeah,
Clear
we could
Hot-
share it in
Roger
our group.
Deakins. That's what I was thinking of. Roger Deakins.
I was like Roger Taylor. I was trying to remember.
Roger Taylor is the drummer for Queen, isn't he? Roger Deakins. This is what happens. You just get to a certain age and you have too much information in your brain, and it all just blends together. Roger Taylor. Yes, he's the drummer for Queen. There we go.
Okay.
Roger Taylor versus Roger Deakins. Roger Deakins is the man. Yeah, but I think
Best known for Blade Runner 2049. No. Well, so apparently he works with Denis quite a bit. Look at
Yeah.
that. Skyfall 1917. I enjoyed that one. No
Yeah.
Country for Old Men. Ooh, that was good too. Just the visuals of it, right?
exactly.
True
You
Grit.
could. The thing about Roger Deakins I appreciate is that you can turn the sound off and still understand everything that's happening in the movie.
Well, because he's got the Coen movies, but he's also got what has he got in there? Beautiful Mind, which is Dead Man Walking, Shawshank, Hudsucker. That's also Coen.
Yeah.
Barton Fink. Oh man, I forgot about
Hudsucker
that.
Proxy is an underappreciated Coen Brothers movie.
I think so. It's one of my favorites. It's probably after Oh Brother, I think, because they both have that strong mythological element to them.
Maybe Hudsucker Proxy just came out at the wrong time, and it wasn't like their previous films.
It's too weird. I think it's too weird for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has that whimsy to it that just kind of throws
Almost a
people off.
Burton-esque whimsy.
Yeah.
Just even the architecture of the movie and the boardroom and the way
Right.
that they set up the shots, it almost feels like Tim Burton consulted on the movie. Yeah.
I'd forgotten. So 1984 was kind of his breakout. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had done some shorts before that, documentaries, but 84. Wow, that have a visual look to it. Wasn't as good as the book, but there you
Right.
go.
It has moments, but like you said, visually it's striking. Although narratively it's a
Thunderheart,
little weak.
Secret Garden. I forgot. Okay, I guess he did do that. Huh.
Yeah.
Of course, Fargo. But also, wow, what a guy. Because I mean, Kundun. I forgot. That's the one with what's his name, right?
Nick Nolte.
No, that's not who
No.
I was thinking of was in it. Well, it's a Scorsese film, so.
Oh, that
They're
was
all-
about the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it was. Yeah.
There's no Americans in that movie.
No.
It's all foreigners.
I tried to watch it.
Yeah, I didn't get very far.
But
anyway,
the point being,
good talent, right? Yeah. Okay, we're
it's
talking about
easy
drug
to
money,
get lost
CIA,
in the sauce when it comes to going down the rabbit trail of these things, because especially in the age of the internet, if you have
right.
one, the curiosity to pick your phone or your iPad up and do the research for yourself rather than relying on other people to send you links, you can find just about anything you want if you just do your due diligence for 20 or 30 minutes. And
Or take the links they send and then let that lead your study.
And I think, because I've seen this, you've seen this, we've both had to work our way through it, is that you can get lost in the abstraction of it all, because it is like a hydra, and then it just continues to grow and spread, because you realize that, okay, this is over here, this cartel trafficking is over here. And on the ground where I lived at, it's kind of in your face, because they run everything, and it's right there, and you can see it. And you can, I've talked to cartel guys before, and I've talked to the heads of cartels before, because...
You mean they're people too?
Yeah, they're nice people. And they're nice
More
people.
More like
until,
compromised, probably. Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, they're evil. They're monsters, but they're nice to you because you're just this gringo and you're a pastor and you're introduced by somebody that knows somebody that is related to you, and they're very cordial and kind to you, which has been my case, been my experience in the United States too, of dealing with people who are in organized crime, let's put it that way, and gang affiliations. They're very nice people to me. As long as you're respectful of them, they're respectful to you. And as long as you're not involved with their trade, you're like a tuna or a grouper in the ocean, right? They're not going to eat you when there's smaller fish, and you're not a threat to them, so they leave you alone.
Right.
And on the local level, it's easy to engage in the civil estate in that way. It's like when I get called to the courthouse or to the jail because somebody's asking for a minister, and they call me because they know me. At that level, it's very easy to interface with those folks and, establish a relationship with them, engage them. But once you start going up the food chain and you start getting to the apex predators, and then you find out who's basically writing their checks for them, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and becomes global. And then it's completely out of hand.
But I think, the problem is that we don't want to think of conspiracy. You don't want to let it get to that point, because usually most conspiracies, there's basically 3 or 4 actors. There's a lot of not innocent, but what do you say, useful idiots along the way. They don't even know their role and how they're being used or manipulated.
It's like Hafer said about the State Department, right? Is that most people that work for the State Department, they're good folks. They're good actors. They just want to make a difference for the good. But the people that are in charge of them are incompetent and can't solve problems. But they don't know that, because it's a monstrous organization.
Right, but that's my point. Is like you can't facilitate a conspiracy, a large-scale conspiracy, with many actors that are in on it, because, they all have to stay quiet. That's one aspect, right? They can't reveal, and they have to stay on the playbook. And the more people that understand the larger scale of it. So, I think what we're seeing is that you're seeing many small conspiracies that together have been orchestrated by a few. For a larger scale conspiracy, right?
Well, think about sex scandals in the church, for example. At the local level, clergy, for example, have been by and large successful at keeping those things under wraps.
Right.
But when you get too many of those, and then let's say the diocese, the district office in our case, once they get involved in it, now you've got another set of people, another set of eyes, another set of voices that are involved. And then when it gets to the synodical level, or it gets to like the archbishop.
Or the diocese,
now all of a sudden, there's even more people, and it's higher up the food chain, which means there's more people involved in these conversations, because you have staff and you have people processing memos for you and emails and texts and crafting, legal documents. It gets out of hand rather quickly. And that's why at a certain
there's
point,
collaboration, but I like I'm just saying that they don't always know their role. They only
it's like
know
those
their
two
little
CIA
part.
agents that were running a drug cartel out of Atlanta. It's like, well, how is that possible? Well, because they were basically independent actors.
Right.
And it wasn't like they were, sending memos to the head office or, calling up headquarters and be like, hey, by the way, is it cool if we run a drug cartel? Like, we promised, like, we'll cut you in. No, they were doing it for themselves. But at a certain point, I think it was the drug cartel that turned them in because they were competition.
Right.
And so there's always a conspiracy going on at the top levels of any organization to keep things that are bad for the look or the brand. They're trying to keep that under wraps. And when it gets out, that's why it's always so bad, is because they're trying to keep it out of the media. They're trying to keep it out of the public eye. So when it does come out, there's a lot of work that has gone into orchestrating these things.
Yeah.
So it's not,
It's an interesting word because we only use it in a negative sense to
what's that,
conspire.
conspiracy? Yeah.
Yeah, but it just means to breathe together. Literally. So you're just
I conspire with my wife all the time to get my kids' presents into the house without them finding out.
Well, and I use this. I've tried to be subversive about this a little bit and this is in the reading for today, with the word indoctrination. And it's like, yeah, no, the state indoctrinates your children in the same way it's just an alternate indoctrination to what the church gives.
Right.
So you can say that's a negative thing. Oh, they're indoctrinating the kids. Or you can say it's a positive thing. They're getting the doctrine of, the faith of Christ, in Christ. So, so conspire. I mean, you can conspire. You can work together, breathe together. We would call that, I guess, concord more than conspire. But to breathe together, like.
Excuse me. Yeah.
That doesn't seem so negative unless it's for evil intent, I suppose.
But it still comes back to locally. What I've done anyways is you recognize that there's just so much that's out of your control, and worrying about it isn't going to change anything. And you have a vocation that's in front of you. It is a part of the civil estate that you've been placed into locally, and within that small sphere, that small ecosystem called the civil estate, you do have certain choices. You do have a certain amount of power and influence, so to speak. Over
the way that you think and the things you say and the things that you do,
correct,
have their influence on those around you.
And I think what I see Christians doing by essentially, again, like we've talked about, turning spiritual cowardice into a virtue so that they can avoid participating in the civil estates, is we could actually set the standard in our churches, in our communities, in our homes in such a way that we say we can be way better than we are right now.
Well, at various times in church history, that's what actually happens. And
correct.
Locally, small place, not globally, but certainly locally. I mean, I would say the first generation, Lutheran Reformation, between Philip and Luther and the Latin school. I mean, hugely influential on the state and on the rest of Christianity.
But I think that's a good point. Is that I don't think we expect much of anything from Christians anymore, because we don't want them to expect much of us.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
we just don't. We don't expect anything of people who come to church on Sunday other than they just show up, put some money in the offering plate so everything gets paid, and then if you have kids, bring them to Sunday school, bring them to confirmation as often as you can. No mandates, no requirements, no law.
Right.
But we expect so little of
I've done
ourselves
this
and each other that when there is a standard imposed upon us, like we were talking about before we went live, I'm called extreme simply because I set my standards so high for myself and like you said, for my family. But as I said to you then, if my 9-year-old can achieve that standard, and you as an adult say that's impossible for you to achieve that standard, which is to be disciplined, to live with integrity and dignity, to be courageous, to have a strong sense of justice and charity and kindness. If you're saying as an adult that that's too much, that I'm expecting too much of you, but my 9-year-old can manifest that, that tells me that indoctrination that you mentioned has been us sitting and basically asking, what is the lowest possible standards that we can establish for Christians?
Well, it's a new kind of slavery then. Or it's the old kind of slavery all over again, going dog to its vomit, that kind of thing.
Right.
I was thinking about, when somebody asks for us to offer some service or some Bible study or something, right? And then it's just my practice now is just to say, all right, you're committing to come every week, then,
Right.
or every month or whatever it is. No, this is for other. No, you don't have to make suggestions for other people.
No,
and I even go a step further. I'm like, look, you want to have this extra, whatever, another Bible study. I need you to go find 2 other, families or people that are going to commit with you to be here.
Right.
Because, my time's valuable.
Yeah.
I want to provide this for you, but I also need you to commit to it. so that I can expect you to be there, and we can, obviously there's emergencies or whatever.
You only need 2 or 3 7 a.m. Bible studies to cure you of your optimism about Bible studies. Hey, Pastor, we should do a 7 a.m. men's Bible study or women's Bible study so that people that have to go to work at 8 can come to Bible study. You're like, that's a great idea. I'd love to do that. And then the first couple, let's say Wednesday mornings, you get 3, 4, 5 people. And then after it snows in the upper Midwest, it's just you and
the snow.
And the snow. And it's the same way with confession. The number of times somebody has called me and said, I need confession. I'm like, awesome. Right. This is fantastic. Somebody actually wants to come to a private confession. Yeah. And then they show up and they complain about everybody for 20 or 30 minutes. And when I ask them, okay, now what of your sins do you need to confess?
Right.
It's like, Pastor, I just did that. I'm like, no, you complained about everybody, but you said nothing about yourself.
Right. Well, and then try to offer regular times for confession. And
I do so that I can be left alone.
Yeah. Come and confess. It's open invitation.
Yeah.
You almost, we don't want to do this because we don't want to turn gospel into law, but it'd be like, no, everybody comes to confession every week, right? Like the old style.
Right.
Like, well, that kind of ruins it, but.
Nobody comes to the sacrament on Sunday if they don't come to confession on Saturday night.
Yeah. Well, I put the kids through it. Just say, I'm going to have you do it once just so you know what it is. Because if you don't even I don't know. I've never been disciplined about it either, though, so it's only fair.
Well, there's no reason to make work for yourself.
No,
I read yesterday a great quote: "Efficiency is intelligent laziness."
I like it. That seems about right.
I kind of dismissed it, and then I turned back to it. I was like, no, wait, there's a point here. There's a point here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, I think because we don't set a high standard for ourselves collectively as the body of Christ, now that we're seeing what we're seeing in our society and how it's affecting the churches, especially the last year and a half, 2 years now, we're suffering as a consequence. Because when it's time to hold the line, for example, there's
the ranks just break. Yeah,
it just melts away.
Yeah,
and they melt into society. It's like we've been talking about. If you bring up the fact that medicine has been turned into a cult, people will reject that because, of course, that's their god.
Well, it's not even just a cult. It's a cult in and of itself for some, like the hypochondriac, right?
Yeah.
But it's just another. I don't even know. It's actually just a practice of a larger cult.
Right.
Because it was politicized, right? You can't take the vax because Trump says take it and he's not trustworthy, but now you need to take it, even though it's the same thing, the same medical thing, because we're saying that it's safe now.
Right.
And so which is perfect cultic behavior, right? You just do what we tell you.
Well, I have people that work in the medical field who are now denying that your immune system is effective against illnesses and disease.
At all.
I'm like, you're in a cult because you're denying objective reality.
That your body has self-defense mechanisms?
Yeah, or antibodies are more effective than a vaccine. Yeah. Same thing. It's like this is
Are you trying
basic.
to get us off of? I think you can say that now on YouTube. I don't know. It's hard to.
We're still too small.
That's what you think.
In like 2 years, we'll be pulled off of YouTube. This episode, once they catch up to us.
Oh, that's true. They do that with my Facebook stuff. You posted this a year ago. Like,
yes.
What?
I've been banned for 30 days twice for posts that I put up like a year before.
Yeah, and here's the problem. Once your account's flagged, it doesn't matter if you go and delete it. Yeah.
You're flagged. Your personal information that you have to load in to get on the platform, they've got that already. Just because you create a new email address, they already know who you are.
They know who you are.
They know your URL. They know how you walk.
This is all sad. So do we have a white pill today or is it a black pill again?
It's progressivism as religion.
That sounds like a black pill.
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right.
I suppose we should record. Yeah.
Rolling.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 220. And we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing.
And I am Donovan Riley. enjoying a champagne supernova in the sky this morning. And
Oh my,
we
that's
are,
a deep cut. Deep cut.
yeah. Oasis is like my ABBA.
Really? I saw him
Yeah.
live. It was a 45-minute show.
Really?
Because as
What year?
is well known, 94, 93.
Oh, really?
somewhere in
So
there.
right,
Early.
like right
Yeah.
when they broke.
Yeah. It was in
Nice.
the Murat ballroom. So it was in the Murat temple. They had a ballroom upstairs, which is kind of cool. So it's a Masonic room. It's all this Masonic
Nice.
imagery.
Yeah.
They set up a stage in there. It was just a ballroom. And a little one. I mean, you could probably only get a few hundred people in there. Yeah, and they
Nice.
they played. I don't remember who opened, but it was like 40 minutes or so in. They had been bickering throughout it. And then they just, one of them walked off. I can't remember, Noel or the other guy.
Liam.
One of them got mad and walked off, and that was the end
Liam
of the
is
show.
the singer and Noel's the, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, okay, that was a great show.
Yeah,
I don't know how much I paid. It wasn't much. It was probably like $16 or something. but-
sure, at that time.
Yeah. That was back when it was fun to go to shows.
Right. Actually, because I was going down rabbit holes this morning when I was having my morning tea. I was going to say, they essentially brought people back to concert venues in England when that album exploded, because up to that point in the late, or the mid to
Oh,
late
in
80s,
England. Okay,
live
yeah.
performances and stuff, it wasn't as big as it was by the mid 90s. And Oasis was one of the big reasons then that the Britpop explosion.
Yeah,
brought
they were going to
people
be
back out.
the new Beatles or something.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
which is the same thing they said about King Crimson, but look at where that went.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, might have been a little off with that prediction.
Well, I love King Crimson, but
They're not the Beatles.
they were never going to be the Beatles. I mean, Court of the Crimson King is like it's brilliant, but that's not. I don't see that going in the direction. Maybe they were thinking like Sgt. Pepper and just
Yeah,
keep
maybe,
going in that
but
direction, but
No.
I don't know. The world
Actually,
wasn't going to come along with that.
Was it Liam or Noel? Maybe it was Noel talked about how they listened to Revolver 24/7 when they were recording their first album.
No.
Because they're
That
obsessed with
follows.
the Beatles.
Yeah, it
They
follows.
were obsessed. Obviously, if you've listened to any of their music and you understand composition, they just rip the Beatles off, which ELO did that too. Jeff Lynne did that with ELO. There are a lot of
Yeah.
bands that ripped off the Beatles. It's like Brian May from Queen said, we ripped off the Beatles playbook. We just had better equipment.
Yeah, production value, all that.
Yeah, that's what he said. He's like, we just had a bigger board than they did. But otherwise, we just ripped off everything that they did and just made it bigger. But hey, if
Well,
it's not,
I mean, Yeah, I mean, is there anything wrong with that?
no, that's what I'm saying though. It's like, if you're going to copy somebody,
Yeah.
probably the Beatles is a good one.
Oh, I forgot to pause Dropbox. Pause
Unfortunately, if you're going to imitate someone not worthy of imitation, Karl Marx would be on that list.
Dropbox. Yeah, and for some reason he still gets a lot of what do you want to airtime?
He really does. Well, it appeals to the old Adam. It just scratches that itch that the old Adam has, that he thinks he's entitled to everything.
I like how you just add neo to the front of his name, and now it's better.
Yeah. It's not Marxism, it's neo. Oh, thank you let's add Freud to that so you can attack my inner child too at the same time.
Oh, and then it's neo. Is that how we do it, or we go back to now we're going to go back to real Marxism, right?
Now we're going to get replaced by somebody with short purple hair and just wander through the film as an extra. Matrix
I got it.
reboot. They should have just named it Matrix the Reboot.
Well, it is called Resurrection. I mean,
It's a reboot. They're going to replace him with Trinity. Trinity is going to be the true chosen one.
I don't agree. It's all speculative.
Break down.
at
Watch
this
that trailer
point.
again, man. Break down the trailer.
It's all speculative. He's
telling
clearly
you.
dead, but
Well, obviously Keanu is mailing it in. He didn't even shave off his John Wick hair,
Why
which
would
he's
you?
filming at the same time. So he's
Yeah.
just cashing a check.
I would do it.
He's not. If you watch that trailer carefully, there's not a single scene with him in it where he has any agency in the entire trailer. Everyone around him has agency, but he has no agency.
He's on the blue pills the whole time.
Even when they show him like defending himself, it's all defensive. It's all passive. He's never an agent. It's always the women around him that are taking agency.
Like
You
you're
watch.
surprised that was going to happen.
No, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, that's what I'm saying though, is that all they're really doing is saying like, get this guy out of the way because he's not actually important. We're going to retcon the entire thing as we do.
That was like the rant that came out this week from who was it? Marsha Lucas, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about how ticked she was at the sequels.
Right.
Because
Well, who
it's
isn't?
like you just took, well, yeah, but you just put in a female character and gave no story, and you didn't care, and she's not even attached to the mythology, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay, thanks, Marcia, but it's a little late.
I think that the Matrix trilogy is like a band that made too many albums, so you just cut and paste all the good songs from each album onto a greatest hits and sell that. And then everyone can be nostalgic for it and be like, yeah, they were such a great band as long as you listen to their greatest hits.
Yeah, but I there's a way that you can renovate things. So like Let It Be. I'm curious to see what Peter Jackson does with the documentary, because he got all that footage from them.
Right.
They gave him the studio footage, and he's like, the stories that you've been hearing aren't exactly the story that's true. I
Sure.
mean, there was obviously animosity, but they were also making music together.
Right. Well, there's mythology, and then there's the documentation.
Right. So he's going to rewrite the mythology a little bit, as apparently. Although it was supposed to come out last year, and it still hasn't come out.
One of the things that last year, 2 years ago, when I started looking at modern war documentaries through Sebastian Junger's Restrepo, is
right.
a great documentary, in my opinion, and this is Junger talking about this too, is a great documentary. The documentarian stays out of the way. He or she does not inject themselves into the documentary in such a way
Right.
that they're intrusive. All the way up to like the music. Like there should be no music. There should be like the documentarian should never appear on camera. You shouldn't hear their voice. It should be like point the camera and
So this
document.
isn't the Civil War guy.
Ken Burns? No.
Yeah, this is not Ken Burns. Okay.
So then I started thinking that way, and then collecting other documentaries on Iraq and Afghanistan. What you find very clearly is what he's talking about, though, is that there are some documentarians who have to insert themselves into the documentary. They need to be a part of it.
You're not
And then
talking
there's-
about necessarily the style of the visual or aesthetic style of the documentary.
No, but you'll notice that it lends itself toward, I need to insert myself. So you're going to hear the documentarian's voice, or they're going to pull, like in this case, they're going to pull soldiers aside
Right.
and like film them against an adobe wall, and they're going to ask them questions like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about your mission? Versus like in Restrepo, he just points the camera at them and lets them go. Like
Although,
he literally
I
just
mean,
becomes a part of the background.
I don't know if I agree with this, because, Fog of War is one of my favorite documentaries ever, the Robert McNamara one.
Yeah.
But partly because I also like Philip Glass music,
Sure.
and it sets the tone for like that whole era that McNamara kind of spans. I don't know. I think the music's actually helpful, but I don't know.
It's
I mean, he is
manipulative.
right, but it's like, how are you going to rehabilitate Robert McNamara? Well, you can if you go back to his Ford days, but
I don't think so. No.
he invented.
forget.
I mean, he didn't necessarily invent the steering wheel, but he made sure they got into Ford cars, and he saved tens of thousands of lives every year. Then, as a result,
Sure.
so
Anywho,
that's what
speaking
I mean.
as
That's
the-
Errol
speaking as
Morris,
the
by the
son
way.
of a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah, that part you can't really rehab.
I will never forgive any of them for what they did.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Just like Rumsfeld and Cheney and all those guys.
They're
All the way up to the
complicated
present tense.
figures.
No, they're
complicated
not.
figures.
No, they're not.
But Errol Morris is
great
just like
documentarian.
Ken Burns, though.
Don't do that. Errol Morris is
They're different
brilliant.
style, but they both have their styles, and they use those styles to manipulate the narrative. I think you're probably right about that. So anyway, I watch what is it, Dark Docs? Have you watched Dark Docs on YouTube?
I don't think so.
They're great little short war documentaries where there's no music usually, and it's just narrating the just footage, raw footage from the military, declassified stuff. Just goes over different actions, and it's just really straightforward. But they're short enough that you're not like you're not an hour and a half. It's just like, we're going to cover this very small aspect, this one conflict or whatever.
Interesting.
So that's the one I would look up.
Nice.
Fascinating ones.
It's interesting that there's
Docs.
not documentarians of the church.
Well, there are some historians.
Historians, mostly written, but not documentarians.
Huh. Well, we don't have a lot of like original footage.
That's part of it too, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose. I'll put a
Well,
link in
unless
the,
you engage in, for example, the pogroms or persecutions of Christians in the 20th century, where we do have documentarian footage, it's just all genocidal and horrible.
I suppose that's true. I mean, because we could do at least the last 150 years or so. Huh.
So
I love watching the documentary like on Seminex there's a few of those. There's
Yeah,
raw
those are
footage,
interesting.
right? From both sides.
Yeah.
kind of try to get a whole picture of what was going on there.
Yeah. It was scarring for some people who were there. But the point is then, we're going to circle back around to Dreher again this morning, like we said, and dive into chapter 3, which is on progressivism as religion. And it begins with a quote from Milan Kundera, who wrote the book of Laughter and Forgetting. And what Milan says is that people fascinated by the idea of progress never suspect that every step forward is also a step on the way to the end. And I completely agree with that statement, because as I've been arguing for a while now, I think we're devolving, not evolving.
I think I said that in the last episode, is like there's no end game.
Right.
It's just continual renovation. Well, if you're going to continually renovate, at some point, you're going to end up with this terrible abomination of a structure, or you're going to completely destroy.
Listening to someone discuss Afghanistan the other day, and a veteran who was there 2002, 2004 the first time, and said when they went, at least from his perspective, they had a very clear mission set when they went in 2002, 2004. And then all of a sudden it pivoted toward, well, now we have to deal with the drug lords. And we have to deal with the opium and production and the opium going out of the country. And then it changed to nation. Yeah. Well, that's kind of what the conclusion was, is that the military industrial complex didn't want anybody to leave. And it changed. They pivoted. And then they pivoted to nation building. So then all of a sudden it was, we need to build schools and we need to have democratic elections. And it just kept changing, and the mission set was lost. And a lot of the generals that were there then were under enormous political pressure to move the ball forward, but they didn't really have a clear mission set.
Well, and are they even really trained or equipped for that role?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And so we see this, I think, here now. And I just saw somebody this morning, a politician, argue that we're quickly, and again, this is political rhetoric too, but that we will very, very soon be called the United States of Venezuela if things keep going the way they are. And it's because socially we don't have a clear mission set as a society. Everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. And the atomization of our society seems purposeful, especially from a corporate consumerist perspective, is that corporations just want you to consume, digest, crap it out, and then do it again.
Yeah.
They don't want you to get together with your friends and compare notes and say, you like that product more than the product that you're currently using? Well, let's go use that product. No, we need to get you hooked on our products because that's how we meet our financials every quarter.
But that, I mean, I hate to say it makes you sound like, you're just cattle, but you have no agency.
The official term is chattel.
Chattel. Oh yeah, that's right. No, I mean, you have no agency. You're just you're just a cog in the wheel. Right. And the key is that you recognize, even if you recognize you're a cog in the wheel, you're happy with it.
Well, it's like Terrence McKenna said, drive down any street in America at 7:00 at night on a weekday and look in the window, and what will you see?
Glowing.
People, a glowing light. People gather around their TV being told how to think, how to speak, what to drink, what to eat, what to take. It's collectively.
And subtly now, right? Because you're watching streaming on demand, and you largely don't, unless you're Hulu or something. Although I was watching Amazon Prime and they were putting commercials in. But it used to be, it was fairly obvious with the commercials. Hey, they're trying to manipulate us here. But now it's just subtly in every, but it's moral and ethical, right? It's not just purchase power. Yeah.
All the commercials that pop up for me on YouTube, which has doubled and tripled the amount of commercials they force you to watch now, are medication, things to eat and drink that are terrible for you. And that's pretty much it, actually.
I get soap and what's Furbo? That's like bed and breakfast, or what do you call it?
Yeah, I get a lot of the Dawn dish soap or whatever it is, washing the duck.
No, I don't get that one. I get Dr. Squatch.
Interesting. I don't get that one.
That's because they know I like the natural stuff. You see.
There we go.
How do they know that? I'm not sure, but they do.
Right. It's all good times.
And a lot of coffee stuff, of course.
Of course.
Coffee I'm never going to drink because it's terrible. Why? People.
So if there's any progress to be had in our society anyways, it's
Yeah.
the corporations are deciding which direction we're going to go. And it's very much the herd mentality then. And as a consequence, the worst thing actually that you can do is be an independent actor. Think for yourself, speak for yourself, act for
Right.
yourself, apart from the herd, which is really just a manifestation of the corporate will. Let's put it that way. And
Yeah. And they
that's
may have
why
an objective,
dissent
though.
from the corporate will must be squashed immediately.
Right. I mean, I think they have a will. It's not just making money, but they're usually trying to make you better consumers in some way, better for them, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So, but what that exactly looks like, maybe they don't have to know.
I saw a commercial this morning for Oreo Thins, and my first thought was, who the hell is going to buy this? It's half of an Oreo.
Is that what it is?
Basically, it's a half of an Oreo. Yeah, they just shrunk an Oreo down, so it's
Would
a
they
thin-
coat it or something?
No, it's an Oreo. It's 2 chocolate wafers.
So
with
it's the
some cream in
opposite of a
middle.
double stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Which means you're just going to eat twice as many because you know mentally. It's like when my wife buys, she used to, we don't anymore, but she used to buy the Schwann's ice cream bars, but they're half bars. They're half sized. But my brain knows it's a half of an ice cream bar, so I eat 2. But then I'm saying to myself, well, I had technically
No, you-
one full ice cream bar.
Or
which
you
means I
eat
can
it,
have
you have them twice as often.
exactly.
Yeah.
They're
So
they're like vitamins,
yeah, you just have one every day instead
like
of
mini
every other
muffins
day.
or whatever. Yeah. So instead of having one ice cream bar and being cool with it, I have 4 because I know that 4 is 2. And they last 2 days.
Look at what Melody,
So it's like-
look at what Melody writes. Look at what she writes.
Home Depot has medieval weapons. I don't even think they carry those. It's true.
They have medieval weapons. Maybe on their online only store.
Right, maybe that's what it is. Or
have to
maybe
show
Melody is just going from aisle to aisle. She's like, well, I got a chain from this aisle, and I got a hammer from that aisle, and then I got an axe handle from this. Oh, look, it's a Morning Star. They're selling medieval weaponry in Home Depot.
Build your own.
Yeah, that's right. Build your own. I like it. Like the Lego movie. Ma'am,
That's right.
ma'am,
Master
we're
builder.
going to have to ask you to leave the store now. You're making the children nervous. Freedom. So, diving into Progressivism as Religion then by Dreher, Chapter 3. In 1905, Moscow High Society gave a banquet in honor of the Russian art impresario Sergei, oh my goodness gracious.
Diaghilev.
Thank you.
You know Diaghilev.
I don't even come close. Like, I'm
If it were in Cyrillic, you'd be able to do it.
100%, absolutely.
Okay, there we
So
go.
Sergei at the Hotel Metropole in Moscow, Diaghilev, is that how you pronounce it? Diaghilev?
Yep.
Has recently curated an epic St. Petersburg exhibition of portraits he had selected on an exhaustive tour of private homes of the wealthy. The dinner was to celebrate his success. Diaghilev knew that Russia was on the precipice of something big. He rose and delivered this toast, again, 1905. We are witnesses of the greatest moment of summing up in history, in the name of a new and unknown culture, which will be created by us, and which will also sweep us away. That is why, without fear or misgiving, I raise my glass to the ruined walls of the beautiful palaces, as well as to the new commandments of a new aesthetic. The only wish that I, an incorrigible sensualist, can express is that the forthcoming struggle should not damage the amenities of life, and that the death should be as beautiful and as illuminating as the resurrection.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is what do you want to say? Community or cultural change? That's it.
Yeah.
A cultural
Recognizing
change,
it.
but it's likened unto baptismal, death and resurrection.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. What Russia's young artists, intellectuals, and cultural elite hoped for and expected was the end of autocracy, class division, and religion, and the advent of a world of liberalism, equality, and secularism. That is horrifying, because that is exactly where we are at now.
Yeah. Well, one uncomfortable truth that that they recognized, or that is recognized here, is that class division actually is part of God's ordering of creation. Mm-hmm. Not everybody's given equally, and to go against that is actually to go against God.
Well, but on the other hand, it's the assumption that the monarchy, for example, is willed by God as somehow superior to collectivism, republicanism, utilitarianism, name a different political order or ideology, anarchism. But the
Anarcho-capitalism,
but even tribalism, right? As Jordan Peterson has argued, tribalism has within it a hierarchy. So I don't think any singular form of government is God ordained. I think hierarchicalism is ordained.
Right. Well, that's why we talk about the family. We did last
Right.
time.
Right.
Before we went on air. Yeah. You have
that's a great
father,
point.
mother. Yeah.
You know, but that there's a hierarchy within the home, and you can deny there's a hierarchy. You can reject that, and yet you will. It's like, a point of comparison is non-liturgical churches. Non-liturgical churches have liturgy.
Sure.
It's implicit, but if you go there for 3 months, you will quickly realize that they have a form of worship that they follow. And they may not have a bulletin, they may not have a quote-unquote order of service, but it starts at a certain time. Certain things happen at certain times during the hour or two of worship. It ends at a specific time every time.
It might be simpler. Yeah.
It might be simpler, but the altar call at the church that I served at in Mexico, it occurred. You could set your watch to the altar call every Sunday.
And the music led you to that point in the same way every time.
Exactly. And the sermon ended at exactly the same, in the same time frame, and we were done with church at exactly the same point. So they were just as liturgical as like Midwestern Lutherans.
And they knew the responses.
They knew the responses. Everybody knew everybody knew what they were supposed to do. And that's when I realized for myself that it was a farce, because I was told, well, we don't believe mainstream denominations are not real Christians because their worship isn't biblical, the preaching isn't scriptural, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then everything they criticized, I realized they were doing it. They just didn't write it down formally.
Well, I mean, into this sentence, liberalism becomes an autocracy.
Yeah.
Equality is used to create class division, right? And then secularism is just a substitute religion.
Yes. Exactly.
So you just change the terminology and maybe the aesthetics of it.
Right.
But you haven't really changed the fact that we're inherently religious people, that we do operate on structure, you know, in order. We can't operate as equals.
As we've noted before, that's why you retain the religious symbology.
The hallowed halls of Congress.
Right. You retain the symbology and the language of religion.
Holy. Give me a break.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Set apart for God's good use. No.
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 So yeah, the hierarchy that exists within the family and then finds its way into the clan or the tribe and then into the state, that's inherent. It's innate in the organizing of any society, because God gives each of us particular talents and gifts and abilities for the betterment of others, which means one person may be naturally a leader. They have the ability to organize people, to motivate people, to organize people in such a way that we work together for the good of the community, whereas others may be good at sculpting pottery, and another may be good at fishing, and another may be good at raising wheat, and another may be good at being a tanner, and another may be good at construction. And then you bring all those people together and you organize them and go, okay, well, who's the most important person in the tribe? Well, the guy that can organize all of us together so we can work together for the betterment of everybody else. And then you just work your way down from there. Well, we need somebody, for example, to make sure that everybody's accountable for doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing. So that person's important. So let's call that person the constable, or that person's in charge of basically taking the boys aside and saying, hey, I'm going to raise you in a certain way to uphold the standards that we have as a tribe or a clan. This is how we behave. This is how we conduct ourselves in relation to each other, but this is how we conduct ourselves in relation to our neighbors. And we got to protect ourselves from those folks. So your job is this. So you're important too, because you're a protector. You protect the clan. And then you just work your way all the way down. And it like you said, in any family, it happens. Right. But also to that point, before we move on, you noted when you read Titus, for example, and it talks about the older women teaching the younger women how to be homemakers, for example, to make a home.
Yeah.
And how just that statement and by the way, as you noted,
it's bluntly offensive.
Paul basically says, if you don't do this, you're guilty of, what was it?
He says it explicitly. It's blasphemy.
Yeah, it's blasphemy. Now,
you're speaking against God's word by not teaching the younger women to be homemakers.
right.
Like, there's a little bit of background that we're going to have to work through here.
Well, I was going to say,
this.
I know that a very sore spot in my congregation is when the older women try to teach the younger women how to do anything. The younger women resent it.
Well,
And then the older women resent the younger women for resenting that they're trying to help them.
I don't need you to teach me how to put canned fruit in Jell-O.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
You can leave that part out.
Yeah. Or
That's
how to
not what
wash the communion, the communion ware or something like that. Yeah.
Some of it is just the attitude or the approach, right? But
Yeah. The arrogance of youth. But, and in certain instances, I just look at it and go, no, I think they've got a point. They don't want to be a part of LDMML. And there's
I just
reasons.
say, you ladies need to work it out.
Exactly. This is not, yeah.
I'm not getting involved.
No, it's not. No, not my circus. So it's there innately, but it's then also the old Adam in his pride who says, but I should be at the top.
Right.
I should be number one. It's like Escape from New York, A number one.
There you go.
And I'm the Duke, A number one. And I should be in charge of everything. And then I look at you, for example, up there at the altar, and I think to myself, I could do this better than Gillespie. I should be up there instead of Gillespie.
Right. But in any group, like I mentioned, we're watching through Community, the sitcom, I guess. And somebody by de facto is going to be the leader. I mean,
Right.
it happens. Or the dad, actually, is how they refer to him. The leader of the group. And he's not a very good one, but that isn't the point.
Right.
But I was also thinking of the papacy and the way that the Philip responds and says, look, I mean, we don't have any problem having a papacy. It's just you're saying it's by divine right. And then later he says, and also you're saying that you have command over the civil estate, which obviously the papacy doesn't. So in both cases, if you're just going to say it's human right and it's for good order, just to kind of keep things straight and who's in charge here, not a big problem.
Right.
But as soon as you say God ordained it and you make it a religious matter, when you don't have God's word behind you, okay.
Right.
That's where you're going off the rails. And that's, of course, when you remove the scriptures from the equation, remove the authority of God, right? Then somebody else gets to take on religious authority and say, here are I don't know, to speak politically or civilly, the norms of democracy. Well, who defines what that is? I don't even know what that is.
Right.
Well, they're there and you need to know them.
Well, I think too, in a certain way, it's a cop-out, intellectual cop-out to just turn that over to the state and say, it's God ordained that the state do that without any scriptural backup. And okay, fine. Let's just, for the 100th time in the last 2 years, let's address this.
Romans 13.
You render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's.
I knew it.
Comma, and to God the things that are God's.
Right.
Everybody, for some reason, that comma turned into a period, and the rest of that sentence just disappeared.
Or that means we separate church and state.
Yeah.
Which is not what that text is about.
It's not. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, as Jesus holds up a coin with Caesar's face on it, and to God the things that are God's.
Oh, you mean pay taxes? You're participating in Caesar's economic scheme, and so Caesar can do whatever he wants with that.
Correct.
Because you're participating in it freely. Mm-hmm. Right. He could have held up a temple coin, and it would have been, you don't have to give that to the Caesar, because Caesar doesn't even want it.
Yeah.
That belongs to the temple. The temple demands it, you give it to the temple. Right.
It's like Chuck E. Cheese tokens. It only works in Chuck E. Cheese.
The temple coins are like the Chuck E. Cheese tokens. I like it. Do we get animatronics in church
What are
too?
the things
That'd be
of
awesome.
God? Since everybody ignores the second half of that statement, what are the things that are God's? What belongs to God then? If the coin is Caesar's, what else is left for God?
I don't know. First commandment, fear, love, and trust.
Everything?
Above all things. Yeah.
Yeah. How about everything?
Even above Caesar? Oh.
Yeah. Weird. Because we always also ignore the fact of who's holding up the coin. God.
The one who has all authority in heaven and on earth.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Given
That's
by
why
the Father.
that's why Jesus makes a coin appear in a fish's mouth to Peter.
Oh, I
So that he
forgot
can
about
get
that
Peter
story.
off his back. Like, we got to pay the toll. We got to pay the toll. And Jesus is like, would you shut up about the toll? But we got to pay. And Jesus is like, fine, go open that fish's mouth. There's your coin.
awesome
Pay the toll.
story.
Can we move on now? Capeman calls it a physical parable.
Oh, I thought it was a miracle.
Either way. But the point is then, all Jesus is asserting is, I'm God. I have authority over everything. Even Caesar, who claims he's a God.
Yeah. Who gave Caesar his face?
Right.
that's on
So
that
therefore,
coin.
when Paul says that God gave the state the sword, right, to punish wrongdoers, to punish injustice, it doesn't change the fact that God is still the authority,
Right.
and that
He's the one
judgment ultimately
executing
belongs to
wrath
God.
on the unrepentant or the evildoer. That's
Right.
it. Yeah.
But when the state becomes the evildoer and stands in the place of God as Antichrist, render to God the things that are God's.
Yeah. Or what does Peter say? We must obey God rather than men.
Exactly.
Well, unless men are operating within the institutions that God has set up.
Right.
You know, it's simple.
Yeah.
But taxes, actually, God doesn't have much to say about taxes.
No.
He doesn't really care much about all the worldly economic schemes. He even subverts them, right? You build
Right.
bigger barns and like, no, you're still going to hell. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, and
It's just-
he says he gives some, like I was saying before, some are rich, some are poor. And we look at that and say, well, that's unjust. And like,
Yeah.
maybe you should stop thinking that any of that actually has anything to do with my love for you.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what it comes down to.
I think so.
Is that what happens is we replace metaphysics with materialism, and then we judge success and wealth and obedience to the state on material principles rather than
But
metaphysical principles.
the material is what? Well, it's downstream, I guess. I don't know how you want to say it, of the reality.
Materialism
But
is a consequence of sin.
right. We treat material as God.
Right. We treat the gift as if it's the giver, and then we worship the gift instead of the giver. And that's how we end up worshiping the state, because the stuff that we're worshiping, the gifts, are quote unquote given to us by the state. That's why the state demands our obedience and our fealty, because they act in
our benevolent leader. Yeah.
right. They act in the stead of God, and then claim to be God, like the papacy.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, people trip all over themselves misinterpreting Romans 12 and 13,
Right.
adding a period instead of a comma, and not even discussing giving to God the things that are God's, which is everything.
Well, and also, I mean, the state is always a gift to you from God. The question is, what is it being used for?
Correct.
Is it there to provide you for your material or physical well-being?
Right.
Sometimes. Is there sometimes maybe to repent you from your idolatry? Yeah, sometimes.
That too.
Yeah, and other things too, probably.
Right. Right. I mean, if the state's acting satanically, I mean, there's
There
not.
can't be a satanic state. What are you talking about?
You mean the fact that Satan is the ruler of this world?
Let's keep reading about Russia, by the way.
Speaking of Satan as the ruler of this world, let's read about Russia.
Okay. Not the Russian people, but yes, the Russian government.
So here we go. What they got instead of autocracy, the end of autocracy, the end of class division, the end of religion, the advent of the world of liberalism, because the word liberal, of course, is always positive and it's full of jelly beans and magical fairy dust. Instead, what did they get?
Unicorns.
Dictatorship, gulags, and the extermination of free speech and expression. Well, the magic jelly bean fields are what actually create the electricity to power our cars. That's why they're clean energy.
Oh, it takes, what was the stat I saw? 81 million, whatever it is, units of oil is used for electricity. And then but it takes like 82 million to mine the lithium needed for a 10-year car battery.
Yeah.
Oh, so wait a minute. We use a lot of oil just to get the lithium for the car. Oh,
Yeah. And then there's all the petroleum that's required to actually power those windmills.
oops. You mean it's a scam?
Dictatorship, gulags, extermination of free speech and expression. Communists had sold their ideology to gullible optimists as the fullest version of the thing every modern person wanted. Progress. Oh, that magic chimera progress.
We are doing pretty good, actually, as a country.
Are
Or
we?
anyway. Yeah, I mean, as far as like things like hunger,
Yeah.
we had relatively free access to medical care.
Had.
Not free as in cost, but like accessibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The modern age is built on the myth of progress. Exactly. By myth, I mean that the concept of historical progress is foundational to the modern era and built into the story we tell ourselves to understand our time and our place in it. Believers in the myth of progress hold that the present is better than the past, and that the future will inevitably be better than the present. You know, like Australia.
Yeah.
Or California.
Well, the question
Or
is,
Dubai.
the question is, one, does God promise, right? Does he promise
exactly.
that this world is going to be a better place? Two, is the Satanics, would be the opposite, are really interested in making this world a better place?
Well, we talked about this. Who were we reading when we talked? Oh, it was Simone Weil, that evil can only reproduce what God makes. And therefore, evil continuously reproduces the same thing over and over. It just repackages it as something new and different. And I've argued since Genesis chapter 4 and 5, the human heart has never changed. You can change the optics of the pyramids, but if you've seen Planned Parenthood's office, that's a ziggurat.
Is it?
It's a pyramid, yeah.
Where is that?
What, the headquarters of Planned Parenthood? Look it up real quick. Planned Parenthood headquarters. And look at
I was
cool
still trying to
images.
figure out who coined the phrase myth of progress.
I don't know. I've always read it, and I've never seen anybody take credit for it. I've never seen it footnoted before. I've just always read it.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a common expression, but
It's like Walt Wangren coined the term the myth of salvific violence, redemptive violence, he called it, redemptive violence. That
Really?
violence can solve all your problems. And then he uses the example like Popeye and Looney Tunes and stuff like that.
So are you looking at, you want me to find the headquarters in DC? Is that what you want? Oh no, that's not it. What is that building? It's bizarro.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if I can pull it up on the screen for the YouTube viewers. Let's see. Stop
there it
screen.
is. The pyramid.
What? You gonna send me a link? I can share it.
Sure.
All right, find the
Houston?
window.
Is it Houston?
Okay, this is the one in DC, which that's not the one you're looking for.
I'm looking at the one in Houston, I think.
All right, you gotta send me that. I don't know which one is the actual
That's
headquarters.
the half of the pyramid there.
Did you send me the link? You didn't send me the link.
No, that one's good enough, the one you posted.
That's like half a pyramid. What
Yeah,
is
right.
it? That's some kind of modern, wacky doodle building. Non-functional, right?
I was watching TV one night and I saw this Aztec pyramid. I thought to myself, half of that would look awesome against the city skyline.
All right, let's see if there's another one. Oh, yeah, there it is. That's Houston. It's the same thing as DC. What? No.
Yeah,
What
isn't that
is
weird?
this building?
Yeah.
Good night.
I think there's a side-by-side where they put like the Incan or Aztec pyramid on one half of it and then that on the other side of the picture.
Oh, wow.
Just
Okay,
interesting
then.
architectural choices.
Well, and I mean, this is the thing. Even the secularists know that these things actually communicate something, right?
Right.
Nothing is purely just unemotional or unattached to any kind of mythology or history.
Right. There's also a certain sense of, and I'm sure everyone has experienced it who's ever stood in a penthouse, for example, or in the executive office of somebody in a high rise and looked down on the city and you could see for literally like hundreds of miles on a clear day. There is a sense of like, I'm bigger than what's happening. Like I'm important because I'm up above everything and I can see so far. Like there's something to that. I've done that. I've stood on like the 54th floor of a skyscraper and looked out at the city and been like, wow, like you can feel yourself turning into a jerk. like look at all those little people down there scurrying around in their ordinary lives.
King of the world or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it feels that way. So I get it. It's intoxicating for sure. But it's also tied up with this myth of progress. And like you said, God doesn't ever say things are going to get better and better. Although the progressive sanctification people,
Oh yeah.
they love to believe that,
Might be worth mentioning them.
which, they're just secularist with a little bit more marinade in the religious pool.
Well, there is a progress.
Downward.
How does Speratus say it? Deeper, deeper, still I fell. My life became a living hell. It was like, oh,
Right.
oops.
Yeah.
Oh, but then I got better. And like,
Well, this is what offends us about Jesus is that our whole project is to become like gods. And in our theology, gods don't have bodies because bodies wear out and die. They're finite. They're mortal. Gods are
okay.
immortal. That's what makes a god, is that gods are immortal and we want to be like God. So we want to escape our flesh, right? We don't want to be human. And then Jesus shows up and says, you know what's really awesome? Flesh. I love it. I love flesh and blood. I love everything about it. That's why I made it.
Yeah, I
came to redeem it. And we're like, I'm sorry, did you not get the memo? Like, you're supposed to help us get away from this. This is ungodly. This is terrible. And Jesus is standing there like, no, dude, like I'm redeeming your flesh and blood because it's beautiful. It's wonderful. I created you this way on purpose.
Yeah.
And then he dies and then is resurrected in the body and says, go ahead, touch me, eat with me so you can see that I'm real. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a spirit. That offends us at the deepest level of our being because we don't want to be flesh and blood. We don't want to be human. We want to be gods. And so anything that we can do, this myth of progress, for example, is a myth that helps us escape our humanity. That's why we love social media. That's why we love VR. That's why we love transhumanism at root, is because it allows us to escape being trapped in our finitude, in the present, in our bodies.
Well, and I would say that, that isn't, some people call that Gnosticism. I don't think that's probably fair. Because Gnosticism is a little bit more specific than that, you know, that there's the whole demiurge and I don't remember all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there was a whole mythology attached to
there's
it.
aeons and...
Right,
yeah.
but it has this, we would just call it like this Gnostic tendency, this just bifurcation of flesh and spirit or flesh, soul, and spirit, which is not helpful because that's not how God makes us.
Right.
Even if we can distinguish maybe a little bit, on the other hand, we can't separate, you know.
Which is why I think then, the whole reason that Jesus redeems the flesh is so that he can sanctify us in our flesh through our vocations and our cross-bearing. We resent him for that. And also we resent the fact that then those whom Jesus makes human, that is, he redeems us body, flesh, or body and soul and mind, when we then are plunged into our humanity, plunged into our human vocations, it offends those who are busily trying to escape their flesh.
Yeah.
Because we hate being reminded of our fleshiness unless it feeds into our need to satisfy the flesh.
Right.
Lust, for example.
Right.
Our concupiscence is what we've historically referred to it as. So as long as God leaves me alone to pursue my fleshly desires and satisfying them in a way that's pleasing to me, again, individuality, then I'll buy in. But as soon as God calls me to renounce myself, deny my urge, deny my lust, now I'm not on board with that anymore.
Right, because repentance isn't progressive. It's regressive, I guess.
Yeah, it's very regressive, actually, because it's calling us back.
Right.
Repent.
Right, so I would say this. I mean, if there is a progress, it's, again, a greater and greater knowledge of one's sinfulness, and then, God willing, by the Spirit, trust in God for the forgiveness of sins, right, in Christ. Right. Yeah. That's progress, we call that faithfulness, maybe? I don't know.
I come back to it because it's very pointed, is that in the large catechism, even in the small catechism for Lutherans, we have this explanation of what it means to not murder our neighbor.
Yeah.
But it actually feeds into not stealing from our neighbor. And people miss this.
Take our bodies, our neighbor's body.
We're supposed to defend our neighbor's possessions and his body.
Mm-hmm.
Not just his possessions, but his body is a part of thievery, because any legitimate self-defense teacher will tell you that when a person comes to take something from you, they only want one of three things: your body, your possessions, or your life. And unless you're willing to protect your body, your possessions, and your life in that situation, accept what's about to happen to you. Otherwise, fight. And so covered under murder and thievery is you are called to protect your neighbor's body from sinners harming your neighbor in his or her body. So then when I tell people this, that, for example, you should take gun safety classes and learn how to use a gun. You should take self-defense classes and learn how to physically defend yourself and others against attacks. They will argue that's not Christian. And then I'll just quote right out of the catechism, protect your neighbor in his body and possessions, and go, can you protect your neighbor in his body? No. So how is what you're saying then, quote unquote, Christian, when you can't love your neighbor as God has called you to love your neighbor by protecting their body?
Well, and it's don't betray him, slander him. You want to use Eighth Commandment, right? Protect his reputation too.
Exactly.
Protecting the whole person.
Yeah.
And everything they have. I mean, I think we talked about this in regards to COVID policy at one point, because people said, well, we're not taking their life, but it's okay to take their livelihood, right? In a way, right?
Right.
They're non-essential workers. No, that's actually another way of destroying their life or taking their life is by
Because
not allowing them to work and,
Yeah.
provide
As Mike
for.
Rose said, the only person who says that anybody's job is non-essential are people that aren't doing that job. But to the
Yeah, I
person
suppose.
doing the job, it's essential because he needs to put food on the table.
Right. And so that, but also if you're attacking, their medical autonomy, ability to care for their body
Yep.
by imposing upon them mandates that, either deprive them of oxygen or, the other one. That's another way of attacking the person. So you think, we have a state that's actually commanding all three. They're attacking the person's well-being, their reputation, their livelihood, in their body, but also spiritual well-being because they attacked the churches.
Correct.
And that was all under the guise of this is, what's
Public
best.
good.
The public good. Yeah. Well, public good is just a nonsensical expression. Public health is a nonsensical expression.
Right.
What is that?
Right.
You don't have a healthy corporate body. How are you even going to judge that? Well, number of deaths or number of hospitalizations, which is what they do. It's like, that's still kind of relatively arbitrary. Because we don't even compare it to like normal death. How many excess deaths were last year? I was like, what was it, like 12% increase or something?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a pandemic to me. Oh, no. Well, you're not supposed to do that. You're only supposed to compare it, to yesterday.
Right.
And
Yeah, exactly. That was last week. That was.
Oh, okay.
It's like the first 48, that TV show. It's like, well, we're going to investigate this murder for the first 48 hours. But after that, we give up. There's, that's old stuff. We got some new stuff we got to move on to.
Right. So the point, I know where Dreher's going here, but I haven't read it, but the idea of progress, we apply it religiously.
Correct.
To even our position in the civil estate.
And then bring it full circle, I think this is why we rebel against, for example, hierarchies, because we know that people at the top get to enjoy their flesh differently than we do at the bottom, like the Met Gala, for example.
Right. Or you had, the wealthiest people last year all increased their net worth by what, 20, 30%?
By the exact amount of money that small businesses lost.
Oh, and was printed by Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Treasury, I should say. Treasury.
Which is neither federal nor reserve.
Printed by the Treasury, backed by bonds.
It's, again, you want to talk about going mad.
Quantitative easing.
Try to figure that out. Try to figure economics out and then go talk to an actual economist. I talked to an investment banker. He's like, none of these people have ever taken an economics class in their life.
No, because they're not actually... They're not actually operating according to what we call economics. They've created a whole different scheme.
It's just
It's not about value and service. It's not about. It's completely arbitrary.
Yeah, they've got a different slide rule than the rest of us. It's crazy. So the modern age is built on the myth of progress. And again, to repeat, myth means the concept of historical progress being foundational to the modern era and built into the story we tell ourselves to understand our time and place in history, meaning we're the best. This is the best it's ever been. We're the richest country on earth. We're the most godly country in the history of the world. We're the best. We're the richest. We're the best.
Or we could be again. Let's make it great again. Right.
Exactly.
And I'm always was like, great again compared to what? Right. When was it great? What standard? What's our standard here?
Right.
There is none.
No. It's a myth. So the believers in the myth of progress hold that the present is better than the past and that the future will inevitably be better than the present. This myth is a powerful tool in the hands of would-be totalitarians. It provides a transcendent source of legitimacy for their actions and frames opposition as backward and ignorant. By the way, if you want to understand how cults happen, or you want to understand how churches become cults, understanding how communists manipulated the myth of progress is important to grasping how today's progressives roll over the opposition. Yeah, you're against progress. That's always the accusation.
How can you be against roads and bridges and
how can you be against climate change?
Human infrastructure. I'm not against climate change. I just don't think we really can do much about it. But
the climate's always changing, so be more specific.
We have to keep the climate identical day to day, just like we have to give equality to all people somehow by taking, and I don't know, kind of Robin Hooding the whole thing. But somehow we're going to manipulate climate so that it's sunny every day and in Philadelphia, right? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
always
right.
sunny in Philadelphia.
I tried to watch that show. That's a hard
You
show.
tried?
I did. Do I have to get past season 1? I don't
Just
know.
watch some clips. Watch the best of on YouTube, and if you don't like it after that,
All right, I'll
then
do that. I'll do that.
It's not going to
I'll
get
try that.
better. Let's put it that way. If you didn't like the first season, it might not get better for you.
These are not good people.
No, they're terrible people, but they're not Rick and Morty levels of terrible. There's still something redemptive about everybody on Always Sunny.
Okay.
I love it. I love everything about the show. It's fantastic. Like we were just talking about that the other night. Is like Charlie has a painting from Hitler, but he's like, no, it's not really from Hitler. I just painted it over it and then signed it Hitler. But then at the end, when it catches fire, it turns out he actually did paint over a painting of Hitler's, and he's sitting on the couch eating cereal dressed up in an SS uniform. Like it just,
Oops.
it's just so random, and that's I just love that humor. Anywho, so the myth of progress is what is always used to bait and switch us in the church, in society. There are so many churches and so many church leaders and pastors over the years, and I've been guilty of it early in my ministry. We're going to fix what the boomers did wrong. For example,
Well,
the
we
boomers. Well, of course we fixed it. It's so much better now. That's why so many churches are closing. But it's always that. It's like the old generation, our fathers or our grandfathers, they got it so wrong, and we got to fix this. So we're going to get rid of their traditions and their rituals, and we're going to replace them with what's new. And, to talk about this more practically, and I talk about this in Bible study a lot, is when someone says, well, we go to the traditional service, I go, oh, you go to the 8 a.m. old people service. And then they smile and laugh because they know I'm telling the truth.
Right.
8 a.m. traditional service is for the old people who like the old, dusty, dry liturgy that is unexciting and isn't good for outreach. And then there's the 10 a.m. contemporary worship service, which is for Gen Xers and lower and their families. And it involves a projection screen and electric instruments. And that's our outreach ministry. And you've bifurcated the church artificially and created 2 congregations. And you basically said to the old people, you're worthless. And so here's your consolation prize. And if you have more than, 2 or 3 pastors on staff, the junior pastor or the old retired guy always gets the 8 a.m. service. And you make the old people feel like they're irrelevant and useless. And they're anti-progress, they're anti-change. They don't like outreach, for example. And I've heard all of these things actually said in my presence at retreats and conferences by pastors and church gurus. And I've even watched churches break away from themselves. And the accusation was, well, we're building a new church because those people are anti-progress. They're against progress. They don't want to change. So we're just going to build another church across town. And I keep warning them, you're raising your children to believe that anything old is bad. And eventually, spoiler alert, you're going to get old and you've raised your parents to resent, or you've raised your children to resent you.
Right. That's the myth of progress, you could just call it, we're going to do contemporary, because the idea of contemporary is that the moment is better than the previous moment.
Right.
Right. And I've made this argument. I don't know if it resonates with people. I'm like, you could chase that, whatever by its tail, I guess, right? Try to catch it by its tail. I don't know what the expression is. You can try to chase it, but you can't always be, if it's driven by you and your heart, you're not always going to be relevant, and you're not always gonna hit the mark where people are like, wow, that was really powerful and it really, pulled my heartstrings or whatever it is. It resonated with me. I mean, to do that week in and week out.
Well, you and I both know most contemporary churches are significantly dated at this point.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be truly contemporary, there's not enough literature, it's not being written fast enough. I suppose you could, write a new hymn every week. I mean, Bach did that, by the way. That was kind of cool. He did that in Leipzig for a few years, 4 years. New cantata every week. I mean, imagine. That would have been amazing.
Right. Well, yeah, it's chronological snobbery to the point.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it is. It's just, it's the assumption that, well, we're better than they were because, well, we've got more.
I pointed this out. We were talking
better knowledge.
We're looking at our steeple out here and how it's kind of crumbling, and we don't know what we're going to do with it. And then I'm like, yeah, and they're like, how did they build that? I'm like, they use scaffolding. But that was 150 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So well, actually, it wasn't that quite that long. 120 years ago.
The value
Yeah,
of
they
life was
built-
different back then.
Well, certainly they were a little bit more patient. But I'm like, but there were people that built things, and they weren't aliens. I'm sorry. They built pyramids. They built, the Greeks built Parthenon.
The Parthenon,
They got Rome.
Acropolis.
You've got the Romans building exquisite roads that many of which are still usable and
Yeah.
better than our roads, right? We've seen the memes. They're like, oh, well, Rome was collapsing. And you're like, yeah, but they also left us with some pretty incredible,
Right.
heritage. So, that idea. I think overall, yes, it's true. We lost Alexandria, the library, but there's got to be knowledge. And speaking of myth of progress, I was trying to find it. You can find a quote, like, for example, from Xenophanes. So this has been around a while. The gods did not reveal to men all things in the beginning, but men through their own search find in the course of time that which is better.
Who said that?
Xenophanes, right?
Xenophon?
Xenophanes.
Xeo or Xenophon? Xenophon?
This is of Colophon, so 570 to 478 BC.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea that we're getting better if we just have to search
Has been
and
around
build,
since before Jesus was born.
like 500 years before Jesus. Yeah. The myth of progress is a particular expression. Looks like it starts to pop up in the 1930s among philosophers, et cetera. Yeah.
Really?
So as far as it
Interesting.
being
The
called
30s.
specifically the myth of progress. Yeah. It's connected to the decline of the West, written by a German historian in 1920.
I am familiar with that, yes.
Yeah. So, but the idea of
Man, I
progressivism.
bet you that was an awkward conversation in the second and third reprinting of that book.
Yeah. Once it got around to the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, obviously the idea of progressivism is coming way back philosophically, and then it's completely wrapped up in American ideology and political philosophy. So,
Well, and also, Sergei, going back to Sergei real quick in 1905, when Sergei said his toast, and in 1918, when the Communist Revolution, the October Revolution occurred, I'm going to assume that Sergei and his friends were rounded up
eventually, yeah.
and not treated well as guests of the state.
Yeah, well, I was telling you before we went on air, I was watching the show with Ewan McGregor, right? He's riding his bike with his friend Charlie.
Yeah, the long way around.
Long way around, and they ride on the Road of Bones in what is that, Eastern Siberia. And but they did mention, as they're talking, like, who were the people building these roads? It wasn't workers. It wasn't the working class. These were artists and philosophers and musicians. They were actually the cultural people.
Yeah.
Because that's who you have to attack, the culture, because they're always outliers, right? They're not nonconformists.
Right.
By nature.
Melody says, what you're saying then is that aliens built church steeples.
Well,
And,
barring any
I'm
other
saying
knowledge,
what
or
I
like
would argue
pictures.
actually is that church steeples are an obvious salute to the old Adam because they're giant phalluses in the sky.
I have
They
people
are.
in the congregations that actually listen to the show. And watch,
I know.
and
I have
watch it.
people in my congregation. That's what it is. It's a
And now
phallic
they're going to
symbol.
look at that.
Just like the Washington Monument, it's a phallic symbol. That's what it is.
Well, definitely the Washington Monument, but this, no. This is so that people can hear the church bell and they can see where the church is.
Well, one, shout out to everybody in Pastor Gillespie's congregation. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your attention. And shout out to the people in my congregation who are not shocked in the least by what I just said. A tale of two churches.
I do agree on the Washington Monument, though. There's a documentary. I wish I could find it. I watched it on YouTube, talking about how that was constructed as a counterpoint to Lady Liberty, or what was she called? Columbia, right?
There's a reason that rockets are shaped the way they are. There's a reason
But I wish
steeples are shaped the way they are. There's a reason monuments are shaped the way they are.
It's aerodynamic.
It's the old Adam. It's the old Adam.
Okay, fine.
It's the old Adam. Don't fight it. Don't fight progress, Pastor Gillespie. It's just the old Adam. It's his tribute to himself. The Grand March. The Grand March. Those, by the way, just again as a complete, if you want to talk about like at length what I just mentioned, go talk to Stephen Paulson about this, because Steve, my professor, my doctoral thesis
Mentor.
advisor, my mentor, he has an entire lecture on worship, by the way. It's a worship lecture on the subject of phallic symbolism and how the old Adam literally inserts himself into everything religiously with phallic symbols.
Just read any kind of, archaeology book. Yeah.
Well, yeah, go back to the Old Testament and just look at what happens at the temple, for example, at the time of Manasseh.
It's universal. It's every culture.
Yeah, it is. We can't help ourselves. It's it's a bastardization of what God is basically like, hey, this is a great thing, and this is what you do with it, and it's holy, and I bless this. And then we're like, oh, so it's a toy. Or that's what sin does.
That would be a good idol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of all the things that we could worship, let's not make like belly buttons everywhere. Let's make false idols out of a phallus. That's great. That's good. Mm-hmm. Again, the myth of progress. Oh, we're so smart. We're so advanced. We're so evolved. Really? Because you're gonna
try to talk to me about Easter lilies next. Let's not do that.
Okay. The Grand March. Those steeped in the teachings of Marx believed that communism was inevitable because history, a force with godlike powers of determination, required it. That's a great sentence. Mm-hmm. It's very important. As a historian myself, yes, we use history, as I've said before. When you look into the well of history, you quite often see your own reflection. And I think that's why then we take history and we treat it as if it's divine. It's the fates, right? You can't break that golden strand. It's just the way it is.
But in here, what he's saying is that Marx's approach is that history itself is God.
Correct. That's what I'm saying too, though, is that
there is no God of history. There is just history.
History is divinity, mm-hmm. and you can't escape it.
And you could take that approach as evolutionary, right? I mean, that's how the evolutionists.
I was going to say yes. Geneticists did this in the mid 20th century. We replaced the term history with genetics, DNA.
You can't control your genetics. It's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you an alcoholic? It's genetics. Why are you fat? It's genetics.
Well, I mean, the Bible does say that sin will be visited upon the children to the third and fourth generation.
Right.
But you and I both know you can break the cycle.
Yeah.
Despite genetics.
Sure.
God does.
Yeah, genetics is just this monolithic. We don't know, so we're going to say it's genetic. It's a cop-out. That's all it is.
Well, now you have epigenetics, which
and now you have epigenetics, which is history
manipulate.
And genetics combined.
Oh yeah, look at that.
That's what it is. Epigenetics. It's the collective memory in your DNA of your Viking ancestry. It's like, really? Are you sure about that?
No, it's gene expression.
That's like saying a Chihuahua is a wolf epigenetically.
You can control your gene's expression by what you eat and exercise and that kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Control history.
Kundera says that what makes a leftist of any kind, whether it be socialist, communist, Trotskyites, left liberals, and so on, what makes a leftist is a shared belief that humanity is on a grand march toward progress. The grand march is the splendid march on the road to brotherhood, equality, justice, happiness. I just threw up in my mouth. It goes on and on, obstacles notwithstanding. For obstacles there must be if the march is to be the grand march.
And you might be marching on the bones of the people who died in order to build that road.
Yeah. Again, in a certain sense, it's like Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your front door, hoping you reject them. Because then it proves that they're the chosen ones. It's like, it's like in this country now we talk about the left and the right. Mm-hmm. And I think we should just refer, again, you have American communists and not American communists. That's essentially what it comes down to. Because they're not leftists, they're communists. As he notes, leftists are leftist, whether they're socialist, communist, Trotskyites, left-leaning, they're communists, they're leftists.
Right, but this is the thesis we talked about last week, where left and right, those terms of art from the French Revolution. So it frames it differently than tribal, party politics,
right.
Which is maybe actually a little bit more ideological, whereas left and right is not. It's right. Well, I mean, he's got brotherhood, equality, justice, and happiness in this quote. Mm-hmm. But those are almost metaphysical terms.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, what does that actually mean in day-to-day life?
The state will tell you.
Okay. You'll be, you will own nothing and you'll be happy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you'll eat plant-based food. Bugs.
No, it's the bugs, because that'll improve your social score.
Exactly. Did you see MasterCard already teamed up? I just watched the video 2 days ago. They teamed up with that global climate initiative or something where like your card that you use,
Right.
there's no
You get
currency
lower rates
anymore.
if you're eating the bugs because they have a
Right.
smaller carbon footprint.
Yeah, and then when you go to buy food, it'll tell you if you've exceeded your, what is it, your carbon footprint limit or something like that.
Yeah, allotment, something like that.
Allotment, yeah. So, and if you're wealthy, you can buy your way out of that by purchasing, what do they call that? Gates talks about this with his
Carbon
airliners.
credits?
Yeah, your carbon credits. You'll be able to buy carbon credits because you're wealthy, which is basically a kind of forgiveness.
And then they can use that for redistribution.
Exactly. Ugh. So if progress is inevitable and the Communist Party is the leader of society's grand march to the progressive future, then the theory goes to resist the party is to stand against the future. Indeed, against reality itself. Kind of like I'm not allowed to say that people that are trans are mentally ill because that would be anti-progressive.
Hello, YouTube censors.
You're welcome.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry, as a Christian,
We just got demonetized. Oh, wait, we're not monetized.
we're not monetized. Probably be demonetized by 1517 pretty quick. We keep at it. But the point is that as a Christian, there's only 2 sets of chromosomes, and God doesn't make mistakes.
Nope.
So it doesn't matter what you believe. The fact of the matter is, if you have an XY chromosome, that's who you are. That's what you are. And
What if you have an extra chromosome?
Oh, that's a good point. Now what? Do we chalk that up to original sin? Because I can answer for my father, who's a doctor, and how he counsels families when that happens.
Or
Right.
just say that is what is.
It is what it is. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who
So,
sinned?
yes, exactly.
Yep.
But this is what happens then, is that to say anything negative about the party line in the present tense, you're against the future, therefore you're against progress, and therefore you are negative. You're a negative. You're a bad person. You're morally bad because you're against progress. Like I said, in churches that do this, if you're not for quote unquote contemporary worship, then you're anti-progress. You're old-fashioned. You're traditional.
You're opposed to the growth of the church.
Yeah, you're
Right,
against
'cause
the growth of the church.
We don't use the word progress. We use the word growth. But, we even have a thing. What was it? CGM, right? Church Growth Movement.
Correct.
They even took on that name. It's like, but it presumed that the purpose of the church is to grow what?
Correct.
How? In numbers, influence, finances. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about your district but in my district, when I got here, I had a 5% annual growth expectation.
Yeah. Well, your district's church leadership has changed. Hopefully they drop that now, right?
Yeah, they have. No,
Yeah.
it's completely abandoned, thankfully.
Yeah.
But
When and
I
where
got
he
here,
wills
it-
is what
yeah.
Jesus said about the work of the Spirit, didn't
Right.
he? I thought he
Yeah,
did.
we even had a website set up by the Synod so we could actually put in our numbers, so we got a pat on the back.
Some
from
of
the
us
Synod.
actually wrote bots to scam that, by the way.
Did you?
Well, it's fun,
Anti-progressive.
I think they caught it, but whatever.
Progress is inevitable because history is God. It's divine. You can't escape it. And so we got to march forward because forward is, it's a brighter, what is it? Build back better? We're building a better future for our children and grandchildren.
Well, what is better?
Don't worry, the state will tell you.
Okay.
It's whatever is not where we're coming from.
It's funny though. We're watching the C show SEE on Apple TV.
Oh, right.
And,
Jason
and
Momoa.
you'd think it'd be like totally woke and everything, and there's some gendery kind of stuff on that, but
Right.
But it's post-apocalypse, and it's like, and they're dealing with the fact that all the progress we made. Look at what it got us, right? And after the apocalypse, then they're dependent upon the residuals in some
Right.
degree, and they're learning to live increasingly without them. But there's one scene, they can't see what they're walking amongst,
Right.
and it's all these, broken down windmills, and solar panels are broken over here, and
Yeah.
it's like, did the creators? I mean, are they on board with it, or are they actually against it? It's kind of an
Yeah.
interesting contrast. It's like, because the entire world had progressed to the point. I'm sure it's going to be climate change in the end, right?
Sure.
There was some global climate
Always.
emergency, or maybe it was a lab leak. Haha, that'd be funny.
What was
I don't know
watching?
what-
Oh, Children of Men.
Oh yeah,
That's the premise of the Children of Men. There was a lab leak,
yeah, it was. That was
and it made the world infertile.
fact becomes fiction, or fiction becomes fact.
By the way, for those of you listening who don't know, the whole purpose of these vaccinations is to render the population infertile.
Well, we've already had
destroy
it
the
with
population.
We had it in a more minor way with additives and change of foodstuffs, which has affected fertility and
Right.
testosterone as
Right.
Yeah.
Because we're chattel. To them, we're chattel.
I heard somebody refer to soybeans as Satan's beans the other day. I was like,
Aw.
I mean, people make money off of them, but yeah, no, that's good. You don't need any of those phytoestrogens.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Go hunt and fish for your own food. If progress is inevitable and the Communist Party is the leader of society's grand march to the progressive future, then the theory goes, resisting the party is resisting the future. And by the way, resisting reality itself.
Mm-hmm.
Those who oppose the party oppose progress and freedom and align themselves with greed, backwardsness, bigotry, all manner of injustice. How necessary indeed, how noble it is of the party to bulldoze these stumbling blocks on the grand march and make straight and smooth the road to tomorrow. And he is choosing religious imagery on purpose.
Yes.
The problem with secular millennialism is, in order to get to that brighter future where we all can live in happiness and harmony, you got to kill a lot of people.
Yeah, but that's why I like that from the show I was watching the Road of Bones bit, because now that road is impassable
Yeah.
most of the year. There's gigantic potholes, there's bridges out.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable in the long term. It's a
Well-
wonderful analogy. I mean, that was 2004, I think they made this show, so
It is.
they
if you
didn't
keep
know what
throwing
was coming.
bodies at it.
Well, I suppose. Well, that's what they do. They cut down trees and fill in the holes, but you can
No, I'm
throw
just saying
people in
the
there
road
too.
of bones, being the road of bones, once you don't have the communist state throwing bodies literally on the road,
then it collapses, right?
it
Okay.
collapses. That's the problem with like forced slavery, for example.
Right. Or you run out of bodies at some point, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, every fertility cult eventually runs out of bodies because how many human sacrifices can you offer up to the gods before?
You have a demographic winter, as they call it.
Exactly. Yeah. Ask the Incas. So this is how it happens, though, then, is that there was constant propaganda about how communism was changing the village for the better, recalls Tamás Salyi, a Budapest teacher of English of his Hungarian youth. There are always films of the farmer learning to improve his life with new technology. Those who rejected it were depicted as endangering their families. There are so many examples about how everything old and traditional prevented life from being good and happy. Thus, does the myth of progress become a justification for exercising dictatorial power to eliminate all opposition? Today, totalitarianism amounts to strict, forced regimentation of the grand march toward progress. It is the method by which true believers in progress aim to keep all of society moving forward toward utopia in lockstep, both in their outward actions and in their innermost thoughts.
And if everybody just cooperates this time, we'll get there, right?
Right.
It's a promise, but it's a hope without a promise.
It is. That's why
Yeah.
you're never allowed to question it.
Because if you actually ask, like, what is the goal here?
Right.
Well, it's to get better. It's like, well, what does that look like? Can you describe that for me? Well, no, because we actually don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the issue with what we call transhumanism, but just like whatever it is,
Right.
changing genetic expression, rewriting.
Well, at a certain point, it becomes progress for the sake of progress. It's like idiocracy. It's got electrolytes in it. Well, what are those? Well, it gives you energy. Well, how? Well, because it's got electrolytes in it. But what are electrolytes? And nobody
come
knows.
around, circle,
Right.
circle,
Nobody
circle.
knows. They just know, well, we got to drink this because it's got electrolytes and that's good for you. It's like, you do realize this is making you stupid. Well, no, because we've already been rendered basically inoculated against intelligent thought.
Now you're going to start to postulate something about fluoride in the water.
I would never do such a thing.
Let's not talk about that.
No. But this is then what happens is it's a justification for eliminating all opposition. And again, going back to the church, I have seen this, Gillespie's seen this, maybe you have in your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
When churches get bitten by the progress bug, progress for the sake of progress becomes the watchword. It becomes the call to arms, basically. Like, this is what is holding us together, is we're progressing. Toward what? Toward the kingdom. Well, what does it look like? It looks like what we're doing.
And then you can't even talk about where the myth collapses. Like, I
Right.
mean, you mentioned before we went on air, or at least before the podcast here, Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a perfect example of the myth of progress failure.
Yeah, the Petch Valley.
Like, is Afghanistan better off than when we started? I'm not so sure.
Depends on who you talk to, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, who's armed better than they were when they started?
Mm-hmm. But you can go back to the communists, and then you can go back to the British, and you can go back to Alexander the Great, and you could ask every time, are you better off? Is Afghanistan better off? Are the people better off for the Greeks being there, or the British, or the Russians, or the Americans now, or now the Chinese?
Right.
At what point do you just accept the fact that you don't belong there?
Right.
They don't want you there.
But I'm thinking domestically too, because just the religious ideology that's attached to, or not even ideology, just terminology that's attached to elections usually. So Barack was President Obama was hope and change. Remember that? Hope and change. And you're like, hope for what? Change towards what?
Well, you didn't read his book. That's why you don't know.
Oh, did he tell us in the book?
Not really.
Okay.
It was about himself, but
Right.
I have a vision for the future. Vote for me and I will lead you there. Well, what does that future look like? Well, here's my platform.
Well, it was universal health care for everybody.
Yeah.
He never really defined what the standard of that health care was going to be, though.
No. But that
Everybody
turned out
has
great.
really
for
terrible
everybody.
health care, but everybody has it.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot of money, and
Right.
it doesn't really...
Well, he never technically said it would be good. He just said we would have it.
Access.
We would all have access to universal health care, even if he has to force us to do it and accept it. Whether it's good or bad, I didn't say anything about that. That's a whole other conversation that we didn't have.
Well, equality of outcome, which is a term of art for Marxists, is like, well, what's the outcome? Everybody's equally what? That's the question.
Right.
Yeah.
When I come back again to the church, that the myth of progress is what has opened a door for the church to jettison the sacraments, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's jettisoned the gospel. It's jettisoned my constant complaint about basically abdicating dereliction of duty in the civil estate. Is the myth of progress has essentially detached us from the things that actually made the church to begin with. And as a consequence, as you know,
So driving us away from vocation or out of vocation rather than driving us further into vocation?
Well, I would say it drives us away from godly vocation.
Right.
We can't escape our vocations, but this is why people flounder in their vocations to understand what I mean when I say use your baptism in your vocations, or when I say that it's a gift of suffering that you're chosen to bear crosses in your vocations.
As
or
husband or wife, as mom and dad, as
or that you're being
citizen, as worker.
sanctified through the bearing of your crosses in your vocations. That it's not some disembodied magic that happens when you come to church and get sprinkled with Jesus juice, and then you're sanctified. No. Also, doing something in your vocation doesn't sanctify you. It's not a works righteousness kind of setup. It's rather in your vocations, you are being sanctified by God. And the way it's being done is you're being poured out as a drink offering, so to speak, for the sake of your wife, your children, your neighbor, your boss, your classmates, whoever it might be. And because we've essentially abdicated that, just run away from it because it's not convenient, we don't have any footing now. Our baptism doesn't have any footing in real life. It's just this spiritualized pablum that, I'm going to say some trite platitudes in the sermon about baptism and you're all going to feel good about it, and then go home and get punched in the mouth by life and completely forget about baptism now because it doesn't fit into your life because I never catechized you.
I know it sounds like a trite phrase, but that whole "they will know we are Christians by our
By
love."
our love.
Right, and it's largely because we don't understand what love is. But
Correct.
love for neighbor is active service. As we talked about earlier.
Love suffers all things, endures all things, etc.
Right. So I don't know, like in your workplace. I mean, if you have to push back against your boss because they're asking you to do something that's violates your conscience or whatever. You suffer that for their sake, right? Because maybe you need to be the one that pushes back,
Right.
and says, this is this violates my religious conscience, or even just
The law.
the law. Yeah. And you're holding them to an account, and that they may repent, right?
To
They may change their
reiterate,
mind.
a mandate is not a law.
That's difficult to demonstrate
It
practically.
is because collectively speaking, our society has decided, well, we're going to treat it as if it is.
Correct. Which is, I don't know if you watched this. This was back first part of the month. Clarence Thomas gave a speech. It was
I
on
saw that.
C-SPAN. I was watching.
Yep.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. But that's what he talks about. It's like the court has been either taken or given. They've either taken onto themselves or been given now by executive branch and by the people authority, or even Congress, to make and administer laws. And that's not their job. Their job is to judge laws, not
Correct.
to make or administer them. And that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So he recognizes it, that the court that is in, well, it's in a precarious position because it's not doing its job. It's actually doing a
Correct.
different job now.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's been weaponized and yeah.
Right. So there's somebody within the court, exercising his vocation as a justice.
Yeah.
And saying the courts are astray. They've gone astray, and they've outside their mandate. There you go. But really, no, the authority established by the Constitution, and we need to rein them in.
Right. And so what happens then, to return to the conclusion of this section, the method by which true believers in progress aim to keep all of society moving forward toward utopia, which of course means no place, in
Right.
lockstep, both in their outward actions and in their innermost thoughts. As many of you might have seen this morning, as of September 24th, 2021, in Australia, police visited people's houses because the state said, hey, we've been monitoring your online activity and we think that you might be an agitant. And so we just wanted to stop by and ask, you planning to protest? You planning to march in the streets? That's a thought crime.
Interesting that he uses that word lockstep, because it got me thinking about the Rockefeller
Operation Lockstep?
Foundation's paper from 2010 called Operation Lockstep,
You are correct.
which was, they had a whole approach. There was an interview I listened to. I think I shared it with you a long time ago, but talking about the Rockefeller Foundation has been doing disaster, specifically pandemic preparedness, since 1913.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of money in it. So they had all this stuff lined up, ready to go for when the pandemic happens.
Correct.
Which maybe it's just preparedness, or maybe it's
Well,
predictive.
I've got the patent forms saved on my phone right now from 2015 when Rockefeller filed for a patent for COVID-19 vaccines.
Was it Rockefeller, or was it, who was it that filed for the patents?
This is
Was it
Rockefeller Foundation.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so they have the solution, and then
In
they patented
2015.
the problem too.
Yeah, it says COVID-19 right at the top of the patent filing. 3 pages. I got it. But no,
Maybe COVID stands for something else then. Huh.
But like I talked about at the beginning of this, when you start going backwards and you start to study this and say, okay, so they created the medical industry on purpose, and they formulated a plan to essentially say we need to make society sick so that we can profit off of this sickness through this business now that we've taken traditional medicine and now we're going to make it into a business. And the way that we make profits off of our business is we profit off of sick people. So then how do we make people sick? And you can say that's malevolent. I would agree with you, and immoral. And yet, as a consequence, it's through indoctrination, generation after generation after generation, we simply accept as normal that we ingest poison into our body that makes us sick, and then we take medication to not cure us, but simply cover the underlying illness or disease. And then the side effects of that medication lead us to then get a second, third, and fourth prescription to cover the side effects of the initial medication.
Right. But when
It's
you
like Pfizer profiting
incentivize,
off of blood clot medicine. And
right, when you incentivize a particular diagnosis or use of particular medical treatment,
Right.
regardless of the actual patient and their actual
Right.
particular needs. I mean, we spend a lot of money on ventilators. That doesn't mean we actually have to use them.
well,
but
what
for
did
some
we
reason-
discover after the fact? Actually
that
killed
they-
more people than it helped.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But it's an industry, and it's not a medical industry. It's a disease management system.
So how is that actually progress?
It's not. That's what I'm saying. It's a de-evolution. It's actually anti-progressive.
But it's couched as progressive.
Right. You
So
don't have
that's
to
why it's a
exercise
myth.
anymore.
Okay.
You can just take a pill.
Oh, the
You don't have
magic
to
weight
eat
loss
healthy.
pill?
We have vitamins and supplements for you. You don't have to eat healthy. You don't even have to exercise anymore. We can fix that too.
Yeah. You don't even have to worry about getting sick because we can inoculate
Right.
you against that.
Right. Well,
Or
take from my side of the house. We have an epidemic of morbid obesity in our country. Over 47% of all kids are morbidly obese now. Kids.
that was
So
an
what do we-
increase during COVID. So somehow,
I can't verify this stat, but I just read this 3 days ago that the average American gained 30 pounds over the course of the last year and a half
right.
because
Well,
of
stress
lockdowns
eating.
and everything. Stress eating and just eating to eat.
Yeah.
And I think that might have something to do with alcohol consumption also increasing by like 400% in the last year because liquor stores were open and gyms weren't. But the point is, okay, how do we cure morbid obesity amongst kids? Well, we could reinstitute a system of physical fitness and teaching our kids about how to eat healthy. And
Wasn't
how
that
to
when we were kids? What was it? The
Yes.
Presidential Physical Fitness Award or whatever?
Yeah,
If you could do a
exactly.
certain number of pull-ups and right. Yeah.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger was in charge of that in the 80s. He was the
Was he?
ambassador for that. Yes, he was. Yes,
that
he
almost
was.
seems tyrannical. Arnold.
Well, I mean, son of a Nazi, but and look how that turned out for him. And we don't care about your freedom. Get jabbed. And so rather than address morbid obesity and cure it, instead, what did they say? Well, no, it's fat positivity. You're fat shaming people. Even though over 80% of people that were hospitalized and died from COVID-19 were also morbidly obese. That never was addressed, even though it was reported across the board, even by mainstream media outlets.
Right.
So even the state acknowledged that morbid obesity was a significantly contributing factor to COVID-19 deaths. We could cure that because that's choice. We can cure that. Or we can say that, no, fat is beautiful and there's nothing unhealthy about being obese.
You just
And
said
if-
it was choice. I thought there were eating disorders.
That's a 1% of the population, though. You're taking the exclusion and making it the norm on purpose to justify the rest.
That would be correct. Yes.
Yeah. So as a consequence, instead of addressing the root issue, which would be progress, by the way, instead we take a step back and say, well, there's nothing they can do, but they can't help themselves. It's genetic or they're not healthy, right? You're fat shaming because you're uncomfortable. You have body dysmorphia. You thin people, you're the problem. You have body
right.
dysmorphia. You people who work out all the time.
Did you notice? We have free lunches for the whole school year here in the public school.
Okay.
Because they didn't spend the money that they were supposed to
Yes.
spend to make sure
Right.
people were able to eat during the pandemic.
Correct.
Because people actually were able to take care of themselves. So they're just like, well, we got to spend the money. So they're giving everybody free lunch this year. And I look at the lunches that they get, and you're like, But then they've sent out multiple notices this year that they're having the supply chain shortage stuff, right?
Right.
What are the stuff that's actually short in supply? Well, I don't know. Things like vegetables. Like, but you have plenty of, processed wheat. Obviously here,
Meat.
dairy is no big deal.
Don't forget meat. We got to get rid
Oh,
of
and
meat.
they're short on meat too. So they're short on meat, vegetables,
Right.
Things that occur in nature.
Yeah.
I guess fruit too, to some degree. You're like,
But we're progressing. We're progressing.
well, here's your protein bar made with substances that we can't tell you.
Right. Yeah. They don't exist outside a lab. That's
I saw the
progress.
FDA approved lab-grown meat now.
So let's hit it hard now. Okay. So we've just offended the secular side of our listeners. Now let's offend the rest of them.
Okay.
The church and the worship of the church.
Lab-grown meat.
Essentially what passes for worship in the church a lot is lab-grown meat. Yeah, it's Frankenmeat. And I wonder too, again, if we just can't take that step back and emotionally detach from our need for, well, it has to be this kind of worship and it has to be this kind of a sound. And as a consequence, we can't objectively simply, like we talked about last time, I think, of you have canned music, for example. So you have this DVD set and it's not real music. I'm just going to say that. It's not real. It's reproduced. And
It's recorded music, which is
that's what I mean, though. It's reproduced
yeah.
music it's reproduced in the sense you're playing it now, but it was recorded somewhere else. It's pre-recorded, it's reproduced.
It comes in a big box.
Like that. There we go. It's pretty. And it costs, what, $700?
Yeah, they're like CDs.
Is that a $700 box of CDs?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So let's not even talk about the price. Which
Well, I mean, it's like 950 hymns. Give me a break.
I don't care. I'm morally opposed to the church charging $700 to congregations that can't afford to pay an organist.
Well, you pay that once, and then you get to use it as many times as you want.
Sure. Do you have to renew the licensing for those songs every year? Do you have to pay a licensing fee every year?
Yes, you do.
There we go. I'll say it. It's a scam. There. I have no love for CPH. It's a scam.
You have no love for people making money off of their work.
They have tens of millions of dollars in their bank account.
I don't know if it's close to 10 million. Yeah, according to the balance
I know
sheet.
how much money they made off the hymnals.
Right.
I've
That was
seen
like
the
6 or
receipts.
7 million that they banked on that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was more than that.
Was it?
Well, at least a certain person who's close to our president told me it was a lot more than that.
Yeah. It is kind of weird having a publishing arm of the church that
Profits
yes,
off the catechism.
that it's not really a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's not.
I don't think it actually is. I think it's not a nonprofit actually. It's incorporated as a corporation.
Point being, the worship of the church and
Yeah,
the worship of the church over the centuries, not just recently, but the centuries. What is it that is necessary? And what we end up doing is we get in these arguments about the musicality, the instrumentation, versus what are we confessing in our worship?
Yeah. It's not whether we sing hymns, it's what hymns we sing.
Correct.
It's not how we sing them, it's whether we confess God's word with them
Right.
faithfully. Yeah.
And what the myth of progress has done in the church, in my opinion, is it's eliminated the ability for us to take, a step back and ask, what exactly makes the church, the body of Christ? What makes worship godly worship? What makes preaching Christian, right? And quite often it's just a simple matter of, well, we're Christians and therefore what we do is Christian and therefore it's God-pleasing.
Yeah. Or maybe a little bit softer than that is it's always about Jesus.
For you, for the forgiveness of sins.
No, that's different. We talk
Right.
about God or about Jesus.
Right, yeah. Again,
We've
trite
been singing.
platitudes.
We've
Yeah.
been singing this week a "Beautiful Savior" hymn, right? And it's not wrong, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
But
It's not wrong.
It's not wrong, but it's just like, well, he's beautiful because of all these abstract qualities, ultimately. And you're like, okay, well, those qualities are ascribed to him in the scriptures, so that's true. But I don't know how this is comforting. Oh, he's bright and shining, and he's pure. All right. So what?
Right.
Ultimately, right? How is that for me?
I will avenge you for what your enemies have done by utterly destroying them.
Well, the kids are smart, right? So
Yeah.
they're like, okay, I was like, when was he bright? And they're like, oh, on the Transfiguration. I said, well, what did the people do? Well, they fell down on their faces because they were terrified of him. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other kid's like, oh, that's like that guy in the Old Testament, right? Where he had to wear the bucket over his head. I'm like,
The
no,
bucket
actually,
over his head?
It was a veil. But yeah,
That's awesome.
Moses, right?
No,
Moses
I
was
prefer
terrified.
bucket. From now on, it will be a bucket.
Oh, you could call Moses Buckethead then.
I love it. Yes.
He had to wear a bucket over his head because his face glowed with the glory of God, which was terrifying. It wasn't comforting like beautiful Savior like to him.
Right.
It actually frightened the people, it terrified them. So yeah. So there you go. I mean, it's just like, is it wrong? No. Does it really teach anything that's beneficial
No.
for faith and life?
It's a protein bar.
I guess.
It's a spiritual
yeah.
protein bar. It does something. It fills you up. It's got protein in it. It's just got a whole bunch of other stuff in it that it's a candy bar. That makes it a candy bar.
Yeah.
In the end, and that's what I mean is that of all of the entities in our society, the church should be the most resistant to progress because we haven't changed our message since prehistory.
Well, we believe that people haven't changed either.
And you and I believe, that's like we said the other day about the Project Veritas video, the second one. I'm like, I'm unimpressed. I expected better. And then you reminded me, you're like, yeah, that's because you have a low anthropology. Most people are horrified by this. And then the next day, sure enough, on social media, most people were horrified by that second video.
USA Today was trying to defend the guy. With the,
Yes.
Was that the shooting the darts with the vaccine?
Yeah, that was the guy who
He was
like, yeah,
speaking
we
with
just-
hyperbole,
No,
but yeah.
we need to shoot black people with darts coated in vaccine. Not just people, black people.
I mean, obviously that guy was a caricature of any number of things.
Yes.
But still, yeah. The people
But
don't
the
believe
point is, I have such a low anthropology. I expected like insider in the FDA labs, the scientists, like, yeah, no, we threw like alien DNA in this bad boy. I can't believe we're injecting people with this. That's what I want to hear. Not, yeah, we should blow dart black people. I'm like,
Yeah, they wouldn't believe
I've
you
heard
if you
that
heard that.
before. I've heard that before.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you're not the first whack-a-mole to say stuff like that. But I have a low anthropology, so I also
Whereas,
believe
like,
that we don't change.
Whereas the reveals that Daedalin did with Pitt,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, they're grafting. This is our beloved Fauci. He's funded these experiments where they're grafting. What was it? Human scalps.
Onto the back of mice. Oh.
Yeah. You're like, no, that actually is horrifying.
Actually, it's baby scalps, to be specific.
Yeah,
It's
aborted
baby.
baby
Yeah.
cells.
Yeah.
Scalps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually horrifying, and that doesn't get any press. But Veritas with the guy who's just kind of joking about
This is the
forced
point, though, and
inoculation of black
it's-
people.
It's good you brought up Pitt, because even the Christian church is unfazed by that information. And
At this point?
there is no clearer sign that we are in a culture of death, that we are in a death cult as a society, than that we murder fully born people, cut their bodies up into pieces, sell them to labs, and then that lab takes that and sews it to the back of a rodent for an experiment. And the church is just like, yeah, it's evil. Moving on. Jesus will take care of it. Again, we just abdicate our responsibility in the civil estate.
Well, there was a recent interview I listened to on the Victor Davis Hanson show. I mentioned him before. He's a fellow at the Hoover Institute. I don't know what else. UC Davis is, I think, where he taught. A farmer. I mean, he's like us, right? He does a lot of different things. But he's a classicist, right? But he pointed this out just from a secular perspective. We talked about in the last episode, I think, that we've lost our ability to blush, right?
Yeah.
He says that, but in a secular perspective, he's not speaking explicitly as a Christian.
Sure.
There's no shame in our culture.
Exactly.
It's effectively death. I mean, there's no sense of shame. You can.
Right.
We've lamented this, like people would go to church on Sunday just to avoid the shame of being found outside of church, right?
Right.
Generations ago, and now it's like do whatever you want. I mean,
Right.
I've had people walk into church after church with no shame and
Correct.
come to talk to me, and you're like, we were all here an hour ago. What?
Right. No, I have people drop off their kids at Sunday school and then pick them up as church is starting and leave.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are you doing? Well, we got stuff we got to do. I'm like, when? Like at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday? Well, no, but we have to get ready. For what?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
no
And so
shame.
that's that lack of shame, right? And that was a helpful, I don't know, tool, I guess, is what we call it.
You know, this monkey's going to go to heaven. So that's what it comes down to in the end. Everybody believes that they're going to be going to heaven because they're good people and they go to church once in a while, and they try to do their best.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then, I'm not like Manasseh. I'm not like Samson. I'm not like Peter. I mean, he's just silly. He renounced Jesus. I would never do that as they're leaving the church, as the church bells are ringing.
Right. Exactly.
Like, the irony. But how, like you and I were talking then beforehand too, is as pastors, our ministry has been reduced to such a granular, specific function, which is don't call us, we'll call you when and if we need you. And you will stay out of our lives. You will not preach or teach about our lives. You will not tell us how to parent our children. You will not tell us what a Christian family is or is not. You will not talk about COVID or the vaccines. God help you if you talk about vaccines, by the way, in the sermon or in Bible study. Which again is a clear indicator.
Because they're morally neutral, right?
Yeah, they're all morally neutral issues, and it's a matter of personal choice. Because again, we don't belong to a body called, the body of Christ as a church, but we are each individuals who agree to engage in this social contract when we come in the building, and we're all here for our individual wants and needs, and I'm just a table waiter. I'm just there to give you what you want, and then if you need me during the week, you call, and I'm expected to be ready for you. And I've had arguments with my elders about this, where they're like, I'm like, no, when I'm done working, my time is my own. And what I do with my time is none of your business. And if you need me and I'm busy and I can't be there, guess what? You'll wait. And they're like, no, you're on call all the time. I'm like, no, I'm not. Because I'm physically removed from you a lot of the times at night. I'm an hour away. So if you need me, you'll wait. If you need me, here's when I'm available. But their expectation is, you need to be available whenever we need you. And I just said, I'm not your slave. I don't exist for you. Just because you pay me doesn't mean that you get me 24/7.
You do serve them, right?
I serve them. But I also have a primary vocation, which is as husband and father. Pastoral care and pastoral ministry is not my primary vocation. And like I said, the expectation of the congregation, then many people is, well, when we need you, come running. But the rest of the time, we don't care what you're doing, as long as you're not in our face. And when we come to church on Sunday, what we expect then is, tell us something that we like to hear. Again, you can tell us a little bit of law. You can preach the law to us, just as long as you give us the Jesus juice at the end so we feel good leaving church on Sunday. Make sure that the hymns are uplifting, right? Make sure that the music is pleasing to the ear and easy to sing along to. Make sure that the prayers aren't confrontational. And for announcements, don't lecture us about our responsibilities as Christians.
Right. So what you're pointing out, I think we've been doing it the whole episode. How long have we been going? A little while. Is that the church isn't divorced from the culture that we swim in.
I think it's actually been consumed by it.
I would argue, not only has it been consumed, but I want to suggest that it's been manipulated because it is one of the agents of change. It's recognized as an agent of change. Remember, I don't know if this was the case in your state, but it was definitely here, is that when they were trying to get an uptick in vaccination rate, our governor explicitly said that they were going to be reaching out to
the churches.
To the churches to be both center, places where they could distribute vaccines, but it was more than that. It's like, we're going to enlist the faith-based leaders in these communities to reduce hesitancy or whatever it was.
Right.
And they rightly recognize that you and I have influence over some people. Maybe not that much.
In rural areas, though, we do.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Yeah.
I was explaining this to my coach the other day because his wife is a nurse in the ICU and she's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
And I said, what's really confused the issue is that there are large Christian church bodies like the Orthodox Church in America and the Roman Catholic Church in America who are openly advocating for the vaccines and are telling their people, you don't get religious exemptions from our priests.
The Latter-day Saints made it worldwide. Mask mandate.
There we go.
Worldwide mask mandate. Yep.
So now if you're an individual Christian asking for a religious exemption, your employer can say, but these big church bodies are against you doing this, so I have precedent. Yeah. Yeah. Which makes it worse.
I saw that if you try to get a religious exemption in military, they just made it that you have to it's a pretty intrusive examination, basically, is what they do of you, as if they're your catechist, and examine you for the supper. Now you have to get examined before you're not subjected to this religious practice.
I'm going through that with a member right now, actually.
Yeah.
It's gross, is what it is. Because, like you said, I'm looking at this and I'm reading this letter and I'm saying to myself, "Oh, so you're a theologian of the church, are you, Colonel?
Yeah,
you know better than I do."
Well, okay. I mean, in one sense, they think that that's how we operate, that we operate by coercion in the church. And that's not entirely wrong, actually, in some places, some tradition. We try not to. But coercion is, it's the old Adam's way of exerting domination, I suppose. Yeah. Power, influence.
Because it, again, as we said earlier, we recognize there's hierarchies, and we recognize within those hierarchies there are people that have more influence than other people. And to your point then, they recognize in certain areas, church leaders have influence and they have sway. And so therefore we will appeal to them. And
or we'll undermine them.
That's what I was going to say, is that, and if they're not down with our program, then we will marginalize them, vilify them, and undermine their authority in those communities.
Christian white supremacists, as if those three words necessarily go together.
Yeah.
Evangelical Christian white supremacy.
There we
keep
go.
Adding terms until the bucket is big enough that it captures all the opponents.
Right. Which we read about.
Anti-vax,
which we read is it's not just that you are anti-progress, right? But you're greedy, you're backwards, you're bigoted.
You're anti-happiness.
You're anti-happiness. You're anti-safety. Yeah. You're against the public good. You're and ultimately all it comes down to is you're against progress.
Well, or really, you're just against us.
Yeah, that's just code for you're against us. Exactly.
And they're not wrong.
No, they're not. But as I said, so many have essentially run away from the problem so as not to get entangled in it, that when you do stand up and say something authoritatively within your office, people look at you strange.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with the political class if, for example, they had to divest all their assets when they enter office, that they can't do any kind of stock trading. You know, if they share the information, there's you know, some significant civil, you know, action that can be taken against them, et cetera.
Well,
but we don't hold them to any kind of standard like that.
Well, I was going to say, on the other hand, within the church, for example, you and I don't really have, I mean, on paper, we have a system of checks and balances. But in actual fact, you and I don't really have there's nobody checking us, except if you have good elders in your congregation, or you have, you know, people that hold you accountable in your church. But as far as the church body goes, there's not a lot of oversight.
You know, that's true, because it works in the opposite way. If you're held, you can be held to account for completely nonsensical, as I experienced, nonsensical reasons. It's like, no, that's not actually, you're just being arbitrary and vindictive
capricious.
here. Yeah, capricious.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, there's no standard. There's that, you know. So I don't mind being held to a standard.
We'll tell you what the standard is when we come. When we get there, we'll tell you what the standard is. And trust me, you didn't meet it. That's why we're coming.
Well, I mean, we hold ourselves to some standards. I've got a few of them back here. It's like,
I got a whole book.
Like, this is, where is it? Over here? Yeah. The agenda, right? This, like, here's how you do a funeral. I'm like, okay, that works pretty good for me. I like it.
I like it.
Yep.
It's good.
Here's how you ordain somebody. Okay, that's good.
Right.
Just scripture.
Right.
Burial of a stillborn child. I mean, that's helpful.
It's all there.
It's hard to know what to say, but there you go.
There it is.
It's not the only way you could do things, but
right. Which, by the way, we talked about this too earlier, is that the lack of standards in the congregation start with the pastor, in my opinion. If the pastor
he doesn't hold himself to any scale, yeah.
It lowers the bar for everybody. Because how am I supposed to speak authoritatively to things that I myself don't even hold myself apart from?
It's like, Pastor, you don't have to prepare that much for Bible study. Like, if I don't,
correct.
Wait to see what you get.
Right. You don't want me not prepared for Bible study. Let's put it that way. Because, well, if you've listened to this podcast before, you know exactly
this is what it looks like.
Exactly. This is what it looks like. Hey, let's talk about the Rockefellers in 1938. But Pastor, we're reading an imprecatory psalm. I'm getting there. I'll get there.
Operation Lockstep. Yes.
Did you have plans this afternoon? Because this is going to take a while. And then, you look like Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, trying to figure out who's getting the mail.
Right.
Because that's all over. So let's wrap it up there, since this Modernity is Progress section is kind of long. It's an episode in itself.
And you already actually hit on this section after that, Progress is Religion, because it talks about individual freedoms. Yeah. So,
well, it's always the challenge in America, is that we do, on paper, hold to individual freedoms, even though currently it doesn't seem like a lot of people are on board with that. And then within the church, though, we're called to be the body of Christ. And we're called to subsume our individual freedoms for the sake of the whole.
But it is a brilliant picture in a lot of ways, right? Because you're joined together, and yet you're not all the same. Yeah. All right. So it works really well. Say, no, you have a uniquely given, vocational role within that body. Mm-hmm. You don't often get to pick it. It's just, who you are and where you're put. Mm-hmm. And but it all, by God's ordering and by God's giving, it works for the good. Right. Of the body, of the whole. Maybe that's what the problem is here, because we hit on it at the beginning, and maybe it's a good place to summarize, is to say that the idea of progress here, as he's outlining, is not progress as given by God, right? Where God increases faith and love in you, but rather it's an imposed progress by man, right? From the bottom. And so we're imposing upon our own will, will to power, actually, upon society, upon what we think our humanity should even be and represent, rather than let God have his way with us by his word and change us into whatever that looks like. Ultimately, the resurrection, I suppose.
And that's why every time we do this, it's going to be, metaphorically speaking, the Petch Valley all over again. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be another group of people that go in and say, no, we're going to build roads, and we're going to bring civilization to you and progress, and we're going to make your lives better. And the people in that valley say, we're fine. We've been fine for thousands of years. We're fine.
Yeah.
We don't
And
want you here.
unfortunately, we've seen churches where
Correct.
that approach has been made, and it devastates them. It turns it into a wasteland, destroys
So-
the congregation.
If there's any hope in this conversation, that actually is hopeful, because it means that it's doomed to fail in the end. And that's, for the church, that's a good thing. For
The
Christians,
violence
that's a good
is
thing.
inherent in the system. Yes.
Yeah, they'll cannibalize themselves in the end. And we've seen this over and over and again with communist regimes, with Marxist regimes, in the 20th century in particular, is that in the end, they destroy themselves from the inside.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, you can sit there and say, tomorrow's going to be a better day, because evil always, crazy always eats itself in the end. And so we engage with it, we just don't get entangled with it. And maybe that's what Christians are afraid of. Those who take it seriously, is they don't want to become entangled by what's happening in our society today.
Well,
But
that's a real risk, right? I mean, you can,
It is,
you
absolutely.
can become the enemy by
Correct.
in your
Right. It's
as you get to know the enemy, you end up becoming them, right?
Right, exactly. In order to fight the monster, you have to become monsters yourself.
That's it.
And yet we still are called to engage in the civil estate, just as we're called to engage in the spiritual estate in the church. And that these are not individuated things. There's an overlap, and the overlap is you in your vocation. And by trying to run away from the spiritual estate and kind of entangle yourself with civil affairs, or run away from the civil estate and entangle yourself with purely spiritual affairs, you're going to create this dichotomy internally and externally, where you're saying, well, I don't want to be bothered by this.
You're living in a tension that's based on a lie.
Yeah.
That somehow you can bifurcate your existence between
And then
these,
escape.
these estates. Yeah.
Right. And escape the consequences, though, too. That's the thing. And in the end, it doesn't matter whether you live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere in Siberia, for example, or you live in downtown Moscow. Eventually, they're going to knock on your door. Mm-hmm. Maybe later than sooner, but it's inevitable.
Probably sooner than you think, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's the deceit of it.
Especially nowadays with social media. They know everything about you. And yet, in the end, it will come to naught, because, well, God is almighty,
Right.
and he is the Lord of history and time. And therefore, the church is still here. The word of the Lord is still here. The body and blood of Christ are still here. And you can crash against it, as generation after generation is done. But it's, so far, God's record is undefeated when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
And
was
so
just thinking
their
about
downfall is written in their mantras. It's written in their creeds. That's why it's a myth of progress. It's a myth. It's not real, and it never has been.
Wasn't it the original lie from the garden, actually?
Yes, exactly. The original lie, to be like gods. Yeah.
And we haven't stopped trying ever since.
No. So, in the one hand, get worked up about it, because human lives are involved, livelihoods are involved. And like I said, go read the catechisms, the Lutheran catechisms on murder and thievery.
Defend
And
your
reckon-
neighbor. Correct.
Defend your neighbor, but also recognize you're in the world, not of the world. So don't buy into the myth of redemptive violence either,
Right.
because I know that's a temptation for me at all times. The kind of Popeye ideology is like, well, Bluto's threatening olive oil, so I'll go beat up Bluto, and then everything's fine until the next time I have to do it. But it's the myth of progress. It's the myth of redemptive violence, is that violence begets more violence, and in the end, you're just, two monkeys sitting on a cinder, because you blew up the world.
As the world is being consumed by this, really, the attempt to just set everyone against each other. We might be the only people that can show some patience,
Right.
some gentleness, some kindness,
Right.
some
Well,
self-control, right? It's just
Right.
like restraint.
Right. Everything about what the state is doing and what the arms of the state, like Hollywood and the corporate media, are doing is to divide us on purpose. And I would argue they're trying to push us to civil war on purpose.
Violence,
And they want violence to justify unleashing
Whatever.
violence upon us.
Right. Yeah, whatever.
And the church is, according to its charter, the one unifying place in all of the universe, where there is neither male nor female, slave or free, Greek or Jew, that all are one in Christ. And so when we gather together in Christ, in faith, that bond is forged, that we are the body of Christ. Outside of that body, there's nothing but disunity and discord because of the myth of progress.
Right.
And I think then what we need to do as a church ultimately is we must hold the line against that myth and not allow it to infiltrate the church.
Right. So you can speak the truth. And again, the challenge is to speak it in a way that doesn't destroy relationship, but rather, builds it up. Right. Encourages people in the things that they already know are true, but they have either chosen willfully or just, through cultural
But that's our job,
influence.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's literally the pastoral office. It's be a truth teller.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we're called to do, is tell the truth about who Jesus is and who you are.
Well, and my point is that, if you want people to actually, you mentioned Titus because I brought that up to you before, if you want people to actually take you seriously when you talk about, the role of the family, then take care of your family.
Right.
I know there's going to be hypocrisy there at times, right? Of course, it's only hypocrisy if it's unrepentant.
Exactly. I was going to say, but you still have forgiveness. That's the foundation.
Right. So you say, look, we're not perfect, but we live in Christ's forgiveness. We forgive one another. That's because that's the only way that we can make this work. And that's why my kids are the way they are,
Right.
It's not because we're the best parents in the world. It's one through hard work, of course, which you have to emphasize that because people don't think everything comes free now.
Right.
But two, it's like, no, look, we make mistakes and we forgive one another, and it has its way. Jesus has his way with us, and that's why we look the way we do. And that's for you too. I mean, that's the thing. We can hold that out as an example. Our congregation, is it perfect? No. Are we financially responsible? Not really. But that isn't how we judge.
No.
Exactly. Not always either. No. But always repenting? Yeah. And, seeking a better way? Yeah. But it's a better way that's actually bearing a cross. I mean, I thought we did a whole series, didn't we, on Bunyan and the walk,
Yeah.
and the road. What was that called? Where he's walking
Pilgrim's
on the road?
Progress? That one?
That's it. Ironically, right?
Yeah.
It's a somewhat ironic name because...
That we tore apart. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it has the myth of progress kind of embedded.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah. Well, it's the hero's journey.
Correct.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be the hero of their own story.
Unfortunately, for those of you who have read the edited versions of all those heroic stories, they all die at the end.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's always, we're all tragic heroes in the end.
Yeah.
If you're a hero at all.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's simple. It's just not easy. Cling to Christ, accept your cross humbly, and recognize that your strength, your wisdom, your righteousness, your peace of mind, the peace that the world doesn't understand,
Right.
the ability to forgive as you've been forgiven and love as you've been loved by Christ. These are all very real, concrete things. These are not kind of abstract, general, again, trite platitudes meant to pacify you in the midst of crisis and chaos and struggle. These are very real things.
Because they actually bring peace between people.
To your home, for example, the strength to show up for your family, your spouse, your partner, whoever it might be, the wisdom to understand when you're wrong and when to assert yourself, the humility to acknowledge, I'm not God. I don't have the answers. When I took my kids, to the point, I read this the other day, it's a great point. When you have a baby, they let you carry a baby out of the hospital with no book on how to do it correctly, no instructions whatsoever. And for the first 5 years of this child's life, which is entirely dependent upon you, by the way, who doesn't even know what they're doing, the state has no problem with that. But then all of a sudden, you don't know what's best for your kid.
No, universal health care now, or universal child care, actually.
There we go. That solves everything.
Because we had free kindergarten, but now we have free pre-K now. So they're getting the kids, I think, and we have child care too. So it's basically 6 months.
2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah.
In
the old days, you can give them over as soon as you want.
I was going to say, yeah. All of a sudden, it's like you can raise this child which can't take care of itself, but at a certain point, you're no longer capable of knowing what's best for your child. We'll take care of that for you. It's insanity. But the insanity stems from our point, which is that the strength and the wisdom and the forgiveness and the charity, all the things that are necessary, the self-discipline, by the way, all of those things that are necessary to be grounded in the faith and to raise your children in the faith. All of these things are gifts of the Holy Spirit. They're given to you. They're gifts. The state wants to usurp all of those gifts and take them for themselves and say, no. We know what's best for your child. We know what's best for the family.
But it's lacking any basis in truth.
Correct.
Because they don't have God's word. So it's just like, well, what does this actually look like? Well, it'll be better. Trust us. Like, how is it going to be better?
It hasn't been better since the beginning of creation.
We keep trying though.
Right. But this time,
But so the white pill, it's kind of a black pill again. But the white pill, of course, is that, like you said, we can rest in Jesus. It actually gives you freedom to act, to think, to do.
Correct.
According to conscience.
To not run away.
To not run away. To not be incapacitated by fear of failure, fear of death. All the different fears that we latch on to.
And recognize when you are tested, tempted, overcome even by the things that we just mentioned. That's just garden variety satanic temptation. And it's common to everybody.
Been there, done that, yeah.
And if you are being tempted, if you are being tested, that's a clear sign that the Holy Spirit is at work in your life, by the way. Because guess what? Atheists don't wrestle with this stuff.
Nope.
So don't become disheartened just because you struggle and you fall. Because like Gillespie said, it's not that you fall. It's that you fall and, as a consequence, don't run to the altar. Don't run to the gifts of salvation. The fact that when you fall, your first thought is, I need Jesus. That's a clear, again, no one can confess that Jesus is the Christ unless he has the Holy Spirit.
Correct.
So don't listen to the noise that says, if you fall, there's no redemption for you, there's no forgiveness. No, Jesus died for that too. And we're all tempted and we're all overcome by temptation. And I know Paul says that God would never tempt you beyond your ability to resist that. But Satan is more powerful than you are. And therefore,
but he's not more powerful than God.
Exactly. And so therefore, do not rely on your own strength and understanding, but rather lean harder into Jesus.
I always say the means of escape is, the prayer and the forgiveness of sins. That's the means
Mock Satan.
of escape.
Mock him. Throw your baptism in his face.
Right, exactly.
And say to him, thank you for reminding me I'm a baptized child of God. Because if you weren't, he wouldn't be tempting you.
Right.
He's just mad that Jesus pillaged his house and got you.
Yeah, because there's nothing more than, what this world wants, and obviously Satan's the commander of the world, I suppose, the right word, is to have you live with a guilty conscience, burdened by your sin and weighed down by, what do they call it, dissipation?
Yeah, because then you're going to turn to alternate saviors.
Correct. Who will just drive you further in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll leave it there, and we'll come back next time and talk more about the myth of progress. And
I think we have to, because we've had questions about this too. So.
And by the way, just one more time, everything we're talking about, it pertains to Romans 12 and 13. Everything that we're reading pertains to that.
Since about March
of last year, yes.
Yeah.
Everything pertains to that. So when you email us and say, can you talk about Romans 12 and 13? We have been. Everything that we're covering, everything we're reading, everything we're talking about is a comprehensive breakdown of the chapters. For you, by the way. We do it for you.
Of course.
Because we understand. Of course.
Yeah.
So, God bless and keep you in his baptismal grace today and always, and we'll talk to you again next week for a brand new episode. Peace. There we go.
Stopping recording. Fade out.
That was so much the Minnesota goodbye. Like we were done at
1:40.
Like 1:40, and then it took us 25 minutes to say goodnight. You can come in now. We're done.
I see your Dropbox turned on too.
I just turned it on because
Good for you. You're syncing. Because if I turn mine on, we'll both be blocky from now on out.
We'll be chunky.
Chunky blocky. That's all right.
You're good. We're just live on YouTube. It's
talking
just
to
my
the
wife in the background doing tax stuff. Yeah. We're just talking to the diehards on YouTube who
skip work to listen to us, or listen to us while they work.
Who skip work to listen to us, or are listening to us at work.
Oh, were we working? I guess I'm dressed for work.
Technically, we're being paid to do this, so it's work.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I just get that. I never see that money. It just gets spent.
Right. Exactly. There's numbers.
I forget that I work.
Yeah.
That money goes straight into something and they get spent on something.
They're called children.
Yes.
It goes to your children. Yeah.
Does it? While I work, yeah.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. They
your work
whistle
must be
while you
mindless.
work.
'Cause I had one of my members say, I have to pause the show and look up stuff all the time, so you can't really work and listen to the show if you're, at least not in his case.
Right. Making plantain salve with kids while
Been there, done that too.
apparently Annie got excited by plantain salve. Okay.
Yeah,
Melody
it works.
text my wife on Instagram with your plantain salve.
Yeah, you go pick
recipe.
it. People say it's a weed, but you go pick it and you can use it for that.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, it's in our yard.
There we go.
All right.
Very
That's all
good.
I
Thanks,
work.
everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
All right.
As always, if you know anybody who hasn't subscribed to the podcast or hasn't signed up for the YouTube live stream, please do so.
Or the
I think we're
Telegram.
I still think we're the fastest and most consistently growing podcast in 1517.
We kind of stalled there for a bit, but now with the YouTube, we picked it up actually.
Didn't we? Well,
Yeah,
there we go.
our podcast numbers went back up over 1,000 per episode. So
Yeah, and on the Warrior Priest podcast, I told you I had that dip for like 3 or 4 months. Like I went from like 500 to like 175. And then just in the last month, it started to pick up again. I don't know. I mean, part of it's summer, obviously, it drops off in the summer.
Right.
But it was, from like May or June through August, podcasting across the board saw a significant dip. And maybe it was just like podcast exhaustion from last year.
I think so.
It's like people were just listening because they had nothing else to do. And you
have
get outside.
We got a comment in Telegram to the show. My 10-year-old granddaughter said this morning that she thinks we're getting dumber. We're talking about history.
Are you talking about us on the podcast or just in general?
I think in general, yeah.
I know. But it'd be funnier if she said, I think the guys on the podcast are getting dumber. That'd be fantastic.
I kind of feel that way.
Pastoral ministry lowers your IQ by about 10 every year. It's a side effect of the job.
It makes it a little bit easier, actually.
It really
You don't
does.
over-
Because
you don't
when I
overthink
first started,
things.
I was coming on my PhD work. I was so smart when I came into the ministry.
Yeah.
I was so on point. I was thinking about that the other day. Like I had so many volumes of Luther's works memorized, like volumes I had memorized because I was using them so much. And now I look at it, I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, I definitely overthought things. Was just like, no.
Yes, that's what it
keep
was. I was
simple.
overthinking things. That's what it was.
Yeah. Because you thought you knew, and you don't. And yeah.
Well, I know what it was is I had knowledge, maybe not learning, but I had a lot of knowledge. And I then came to a congregation for people who are like, yeah, we don't care if you know a lot. We want you to take care of us.
Not impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, not impressed. No. As I tell the story, I can't change the axle on a tractor. So we were talking about what she was learning in history. I get you, Teresa.
Oh,
I
I
talk
see.
to my kids
Yeah.
about that all the time too.
The rewriting of history books. Yeah.
And it's such a stab in my eye when I talk about how I learned history. Like I gave my 14-year-old daughter for her literature class this year, I gave her my senior literature textbook, because it's really great. It teaches you not only how to think about reading and writing, but it shows you, and it breaks it down, and it's comprehensive. It's a thick book. It's like over 1,000 pages. And she opens it up, and she says to me, the first chapter of this book was the entire year's curriculum for me when I was, when I was still in school. I'm like, yeah, that's the difference between how I was educated versus how you are being educated in public school
Right.
today.
Right.
And then when it comes to history, then to the point, I am like, it's stunning how little people know about history today
I know,
versus the
just
history we were
personally,
taught.
I don't know that much.
It's just crazy though.
Well, you
Like,
don't have to know
it's
everything about everything, right? But there are probably some primary touch points
some
in
high
the history.
points.
Yeah. Well, not even just high points. I mean, just like significant moments in history. That
Yeah.
You should probably know a
Right.
thing or two. I mean, whether it's state, U.S.,
Right.
even your personal history, your family history. We forget that stuff. I was like,
Yeah.
well, and that's even more relevant, like you said, with genetics, right?
Right.
You might want to know your family history.
Well, it's crazy that my kids, like, they don't really teach anything about Vietnam.
No.
Which explains Afghanistan in a nutshell. But,
Well, I mean, it is
so
kind of a
what-
sore spot.
well, yeah, but here we go again.
So one way to absolve yourself of it is to just to wash it under,
Walk
put it
away,
under the
yeah.
rug. Yeah.
But you listen to Jocko, for example, and there's still Vietnam vets around you can interview. And he interviews these Vietnam vets to capture that living history. And we're listening to a podcast right now, and my son said to me, he's literally describing Afghanistan. I'm like, yeah, he is. Exact same methods, exact same means, exact same outcomes.
Well, what was
And
I was going to talk to you about this, but it didn't really fit in the context of the show. But
stone soup. Yeah.
that you mentioned it in the context of Satan, right? That he apes things.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there are those people, in this cabal or whatever, that are actually aping what they're reading in the Book of Revelation? So rather than it being prophecy, it's being used as playbook.
You mean like the history of the Christian church has done?
How
How many Christians have done the same thing?
Yeah, I suppose.
I mean, there's whole industries made. I mean, just in recent history, the 70s and 80s, there's a whole cottage industry of apocalypticism.
Right, but what I'm saying is that rather than it being prophetic, you actually you actually bring it about
No, 100%.
through your own action. You're like, and they're making a mockery of it, right? So here, we're going to call 666, right? We're going to use the numbers and for the
which I think spells neuron. I think.
yeah. So I mean. And so, because they understand the power of symbology, right? And whether it's numerology or other kinds of symbols,
Right.
So they just ape it. They can ape the Bible. You can ape other
sure.
previous times in history. Just because it's not creative. It's actually destructive.
Right.
So you can't create anything new out of whole cloth. There's no creatio ex nihilo.
To your point, is that the projection, for example, by progressives about cultural appropriation would be an example of this. Is that they're projecting onto other people cultural appropriation, but to your point, what they're actually doing is appropriating Christian culture, like the Book of Revelation. They're appropriating other cultures,
Right.
and then they're manifesting in their out, working out these plans. They're manifesting these things. They are literally appropriating other culture and their practices. Like we talked about, if you really want to understand what's happening today, don't look at Nazi Germany. Look at Spain in 1932.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at Francisco Franco's regime, and you get a much clearer picture of what's happening today. But does that mean then that the World Economic Forum or Davos, they looked at Franco and said, well, we can do that better?
Yeah. Well, there's
Or
always
is it just
take it
or
and
is it
then
just
revise it and adapt
you're
it.
just
And
it's just aping something that's always existed?
that's what I think. I mean, how easy for us to hear Jerusalem in Acts 2 as a Marxist kind of ideology.
Yeah.
Well, because it kind of was, and it failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but they were very progressive in Acts 2.
Right. Well, what do you do as a Jewish community cut off from the temple? How do you organize yourselves when you've been cut free from the temple? They didn't know. They had never experienced that kind of life. There's no such thing. I mean, excommunication from the temple, we read about that in the tale of the blind man. And everyone's afraid. Like, they're terrified of being excommunicated. And now all of a sudden, you've been cut off. And in the case of James, John, and Peter, they've been tortured by the religious leaders and kicked off the portico of Solomon and told, like, you're not even allowed to set foot in the temple. And so how do you organize yourself when you have nowhere to meet, so to speak? You don't have, do we ape the synagogue? Do we just copy the synagogue and just replace the non-specific language with Jesus? Like, how do we do this? And they did the best that they could with what they had, and it failed. And in a way, they just kind of reverted to the temple model of worship, which is what the Christian form of worship is traditionally.
Right.
It's based on the temple. And so the synagogue worship is kind of what became church worship. And we did actually. We just took, we take Isaiah, right, in the Sanctus, and we just plunk it right down before the words of institution.
Right.
Or the Song of Simeon. I always think about this too. Like, we have so co-opted that because it's right after the Lord's Supper. And we're like, no, this is about the Lord's Supper. I'm like, no, it's not. It's about Simeon holding the baby and being like, here he is, I've seen it. And then we added it later and went, yeah, but we're doing the same thing in the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. Aaron's benediction's that way too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We're co-opting that and taking it captive to Christ, as Paul tells us to, but now switch over to what you just said, which is, now I'm malevolent, but I believe I know what's best for everybody because I'm elite and you're not. You're a peasant. You're chattel.
Right.
And you don't let the cattle, choose where they're going to graze. So I know what's best. Now, how do I get these people to go in the direction I want them to go in? Well, they're these stupid, little, simple, dumb people who believe in a make-believe God in the sky, this old man in the sky. and they follow him, and they've got all these rituals and symbols, and they've got this whole dictionary, this whole lexicon of terms. So if I want them to go where I need them to go, I'll co-opt what they already believe, and I'll weaponize it against them. And then they'll go, and they won't even struggle. They won't even fight.
You just inadvertently described QO and the whole Anons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it uses all that Christian ideology.
Correct.
As much as the progressives do as well.
No, I recognize that right away about Q. Anybody who is religious, overtly religious, like us, is going to recognize that immediately.
Trust the plan, yeah.
And then recognize how many evangelical Christians, and I don't mean evangelical like
stand back and watch the show, yeah.
Exactly. I mean evangelical Christians across the board in every denomination fell into it and went, trust the plan, trust the plan. I'm like, it's God's will.
Yeah, you're presuming there's God at control of this and not somebody else.
If it is predictive AI,
it's godlike.
It is godlike for us because it does what we're not capable of.
Well, it's predictive because it's quantum computing. I'm pretty confident of that. So you can say, well, it's always, both possibilities are always simultaneous.
Right.
Past and future.
Or it could just be a bunch of people on 4chan that are LARPers, and it got out of control.
I think it's government. I think it's government.
I do too.
I think it's government based.
But no, to your point, that's what you do is you take that which is good and holy and you ape it. So as Luther says, you take a chapel, you take God's chapel and you turn it into Satan's cathedral. It's the Last Crusade. It's the last scene in the Last Crusade where he's got to find the chalice from the Last Supper. And the Nazi chick, she picks the wrong cup. She picks the gold chalice.
So Florida's nominee for new Surgeon General, DeSantis nominated, in his speech here, he says, vaccines are not a religion.
There you go.
So somebody's catching on.
Get out the vote.
Oh, he's African. Look at that.
So you're saying he's a white supremacist?
No, he's an American who has black skin.
Yeah, so he's a white supremacist, just like Larry Elder was.
He's the black face of white supremacy.
Yeah. Because again, it has nothing to do with your skin color. It has to do with your ideology.
Joseph Lapato.
Yeah.
Vaccines are not a religion.
Good for
Well,
him.
they're treated that way. Good for you. Thanks for pointing that out. Maybe other people will listen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's obvious that he has to be the Republican candidate for president because he's establishment enough that the rhinos will throw their weight behind him and then help him rig the election in their favor. Because otherwise...
so you're going to win. I mean, that's how we won.
That's what I'm saying.
That's how the Republicans won 2016. Yeah.
Right. Is at the end of the day, the rhinos can't join the DNC to work against you, which is what happened last year. That's why Milley called China, basically. Yeah. It's, again, I watched Dr. Strangelove yesterday, and that last scene in the war room with the big board, and they're talking about cave superiority.
Yep.
And just, the president talking to Dmitry, but you never actually get to hear the Russian. You never get to hear the premier. You just hear
Dimitri's, it's only the one end.
He's at the party. He's drunk. He's like, Dmitry, I can be just as sorry as you too, okay? And they're having this absurd conversation, right? And to me, that's like, I was watching, I'm like, that's the DNC and the rhinos. That's like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham sitting in the room with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And like, we can be just as sad as you are about this thing, Nancy, okay? And they're like, as long as we all agree that war is necessary, right? We're all in agreement that war is necessary because that's how okay, good, okay. Right. So now who are we going to pick for our proxy candidates? And DeSantis is that guy.
It's just kind of weird that that people would assume, that all these people are actual enemies against each other and they're not just collaborating and LARPing in their own way.
Right. What's like that coin thing, right? The thing with Pence being handed the coin.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then the whole thing with Lindsey Graham shaking Kamala Harris's hand and them laughing together after they thought the cameras were off, but C-SPAN was still rolling. And you're like, no, you guys are all on the same team. This is a game to you. It's theater. It's theatrics. That's what you are. And like I said to you, going back and watching Bill Clinton's press conference where he attacked, a heroin chic in the 90s. And the people that he's attacking in the fashion industry were the people, well, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were included in those people that he attacked because they were a part of the fashion industry. They were a part of that group. And the guys that he was attacking in the fashion industry for pushing this were the guys who set him up, we now know, to on quote unquote dates with said models that he was criticizing and saying this is setting a bad example for our young children, especially our girls. And he says it with a straight face. And he's in a room full of other politicians that are like, yes, yes. And you look at the people in the room too, and you're like, okay, now all these years later, we can tell who is a part of this because they've been outed. And you're like, these guys are so good at lying. I wonder if they even realize they're lying at a certain point. Like they're so good at obfuscation because they look so sincere.
Right.
And then after the fact, you find out that they're lying the entire time. But is it the fact that we want to believe it so bad that we're willing to overlook the lie? Or are they just so good at lying and that we're naive? And at this point in time, I think I'd have to argue, no, we just want to accept the lie because it's better than the alternative, which is that we're being run by horrifying monsters.
We can't handle that dissonance.
Right. It's like, again, we drone striked and murdered children, and everyone's like, that's bad. And then unapologetically. And then a guy on a horse chases down an illegal immigrant. The media twists the picture so it looks like he's whipping him with the reins of the horse.
Which, by the way, they do every day. Yeah.
Which they do every day. And they're an arm of the state, and they're run by the CIA. And that is morally abhorrent. So then that gives the government permission to then pull those guys and say, nope, sorry, you're on leave now. You can't do that anymore. That's bad. It's like, so we can drone strike Afghanis, children, unapologetically. And then, like Bean Counter says, they fired the horses. Don't worry. They'll treat the horses the same way they treated all the dogs in Afghanistan.
It's not the horses'
military
fault.
Dogs. The horse is just a tool, man. It's just a tool. It's just an innocent animal.
It's not its fault.
But the point is then, yes, I think what we choose to do is to be willfully blind to the reality of what's happening, even when we have video evidence that proves what we're saying to be true.
Right.
Never forget Ashley Babbitt, people. Never forget her as much as they want us to. Never forget there were 3 towers, not 2. Never forget the Gulf of Tonkin. Never forget the Tuskegee experiments. Never forget the Maine.
You're just being selective in your memories here.
I know.
Yeah, I'm selecting the ones where they lied to us.
Yes. Knowingly. That I know about, not the other ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Read the University of Alaska paper.
But I bring all these up, by the way, because of Teresa's comment about history, which is if you trust the government, then you're willfully ignorant of history. Because you can't know history and trust the government. It's impossible. It's just impossible.
Well, yeah. Because,
and not just our government. I mean any government. Go back as far as you want.
It's a low anthropology. We assume that people given power will misuse it.
Correct.
I mean, because we know we would. So, are you honest?
I mean, no, 100%. That's why you and I think, though, get angry when our congregations don't hold us accountable. At least I do. I get angry. Yeah. I scold my elders. I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
You have to call me out when you see this stuff.
Right.
Like, you cannot just let it go by.
Like I mentioned,
I don't have to remember the Tower of Babel because it's happening in the present tense.
You could have told me somewhere between May and now that you thought this might happen.
Right. Right.
This is why I talked to you a long time ago about it, so that you could warn me and say, Pastor, this might not be the best idea, and here's why. Yeah.
Right. You know, Teresa says that the reason we have history, the reason we have history is so that we can repeat history. The lie is the statement that the purpose of history is so that we can learn from it so that we don't repeat it. That's a lie that we're told as children. The real reason for history is so that we can repeat history.
Like I said, playbook. It's the playbook instead of
It's called doublespeak by Orwell. It's political doublespeak.
It's not,
we say one thing, but we mean the opposite.
East Asia and or Eurasia. Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
We have to.
Which is it? I don't know. We're always at war. Okay, I got it.
Right. And I learned this as a church historian, even when I was doing my dissertation, writing my dissertation, and I'm saying, like, this is what the Reformation was all about, and this is what they taught, and here's the primary sources. I'll translate them for you. And you know what I learned from the church? They didn't care. They didn't want to be reminded of the Reformation and how far we strayed from it.
Right. And that you can't judge Reformation history only by Benty, by the way, which was the favorite for a long time.
Well, there's a reason too, though. It's fun to read. Exactly. It's very fun to read. Maybe not the most scholarly, objective stuff.
No,
but it is fun to read.
It's the same thing about reading the early history of the Missouri Synod.
And he loathed Melanchthon, which then for me, I'm like,
Yeah, sympathetic. I
I'll
know
give you a
there's
pass.
apologists for Melanchthon, but whatever.
yeah. So it's
You can't.
just,
I mean, you can't forgive Melanchthon for the Variata. I'm sorry,
no. I can't forgive him for a lot of stuff actually, but
but that's the one the Benti takes him to task for. Over
yeah,
and
it
over.
really is. Yeah.
Yeah, and fair enough.
If there's anything to learn from history, it's to learn that we will repeat it writ large. As individuals, though, I think we can learn from it. And like you pointed out, just because my dad, my grandfather, and probably my great-grandfather are abusive alcoholics, and I grew up to be an abusive alcoholic, doesn't mean that I can't work my ass off to not become that, to not to be my fate. So I did learn from my personal history, and I chose to change that history. And yet I don't know what's going to happen to my kids because my kids grew up without it. So therefore they don't have anything to fight against. So then do they then writ large, does the generation that grows up with safety and satiety and convenience become soft and then repeat the sins of the generation before we were forced to get hard and figure things out and grow and become stronger as a society? And do we do that to our kids then by trying to give them a better life than we had, especially in relation to addiction and alcoholism?
I just don't presume to know what that actually looks like.
Neither do I, because I don't. Again, it just keeps you awake at night, and you can have no control over it, and you're trying to play God.
No, I just know their life is going to be different than mine. But that's been true. I mean, that's always been true.
Yeah, 100%.
And presume to know what that's going to look like. I can do my best to kind of set them up for success, whatever that might mean. I don't know. But we may not have any of the wealth that we have today. We may go backwards for a while.
Well, that's the one thing we were talking about this morning, is that my kids aren't embarrassed by my wife and I. They're not embarrassed by me and Annie because we didn't raise them to be normal.
I don't even know what that means.
And my son said,
Yeah,
well, I mean, normal.
conformance.
Yeah, exactly. Conform to society standards of normalcy. And my oldest, who's 18, said, who wants to be normal? I was like, yeah, that's
Normal's
indoctrination,
boring.
by the way.
That's right. You've done a good job.
Yeah.
Good for you.
But the counter to that then is that you have to teach your kids how to function within a society that's going to judge them that way.
I know.
And prepare them to be mentally strong enough to also recognize, I don't care about your opinion.
I don't know. I don't think it's possible for society to evolve to the point where they no longer recognize any virtue, any godly virtue. I don't know. I may have still too high of a standard of natural law that it's still going to be self-evident. But
no, I think mental illness has become a virtue.
So you just undermine everything to the point where nothing matters.
We talked about this with grievance culture, right? You get to a certain point in grievance culture where you're like, well, but what's lower than me? Well, we got these people over here who are mentally ill. Let's give them the platform. Let's promote them. And then you just aspire to become like them.
I mean, I guess I have to say that it is possible eventually for there to be no reality, because that's what hell would be.
Well, that's what communism is.
Everything is a lie.
Everything's a lie. Everyone's spying on everybody else. You can't trust anything to be true. No. You just live in a state of, am I insane or is everybody else insane?
Every godly institution's undermined, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So yes, I think writ small, it is possible for you to buck the system and step out of line. But writ large, never. No, there's just too many people that demand to have a false savior and a false God.
Right. And God has given them over to it too. Yeah.
Right. I need you to take responsibility and consequence away from me. So as long as it doesn't impinge on my ability to watch TV and shove garbage in my face and do whatever I feel like in my home, relatively speaking, I'll go along with the public school system. I'll go along with the mandates. I'll go along with paying my taxes and not worrying about where the money's going to, as long as I still can enjoy my conveniences.
Right.
That's the mass of people. As individuals, as families, as small groups, I think you can manage it. It's just that you have to figure out how to still function within that society. Because I still have to pay taxes. I'm working on not, but it's a long road.
Well, you can't make any income.
Well, there is that. I might have myself declared dead, but I'm looking into it. I'm like, how much will it cost me to expatriate? Yeah. But what are you going to do? You know?
Yeah.
Jesus is going to be here. He's going to be here soon.
Well, do the things you can do, and that's
exactly.
it.
Exactly. Do the things that God has given you to do, and recognize that if God has given this to you to do, there's a reason. And as long as you do it humbly and repentantly, there's two adverbs for you. Even if you go wrong, he'll call you back. But like we said, you always have to recognize there's the temptation to become like the thing that you're fighting against. Because you have to learn the enemy's tactics in order to defeat the enemy, or at least maneuver around the enemy.
Yeah, and I don't know, without a major reform to the system, I don't know if it's possible to be active in the civil estate without it consuming.
Well,
you,
again, going back to the example of the Pech Valley, these Afghans have been living in this valley for over 1,000 years. They're still basically Stone Age in how they function, but it's how they function. And to go in there and to say to them, you need to change because the guy that is in the South who speaks a different dialect than you, who has a different set of traditions and rituals than you, who believes in a different God than you, by the way, because the people in the Pech Valley believe in friggin' witchcraft, and yet simultaneously are expected to worship the Muslim God because of the Taliban. All that stuff swirling around, and at the end of the day, they just look at you and go, yeah, you're just like the last group of people that came through. And you know what? In 50 years, we'll still be here, and you'll be gone. And you know what? Maybe the Chinese will be here. Guess what? They'll be gone eventually too. And we'll still be here, and we'll still be living this way. Because you can't change us, because we don't want to. And so, yeah, all of Afghanistan could embrace democracy or communism or whatever and completely change. And, become like Qatar even. Like, just become like this wonder of the modern world. But the Pech Valley will always be the Pech Valley. And they will not allow modernity. They will not allow that technology and innovation to come into that valley and change them. They just won't.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that you can do other than annihilate them.
It might change, but it's not going to be because you did it.
Correct. Like I said, at the end of the day, the only way to change that valley is to annihilate every living being in that valley. Right. And then import people into the valley.
But every time God told people to do that, they didn't do it.
Correct. I mean, again, we're reading Judges in chapel. That's chapter 2 in a nutshell. Over and over.
If only you could have done the thing.
But they make great slaves, Lord. No, I said get rid of them. But they're here.
Their wives are hot.
Their wives are hot. And their kids have strong backs. What's it going to hurt? What's it going to hurt? Let me tell you a story about this place called Egypt and your grandfathers, who you don't know because they all died. That was me. You don't want this. Oh, you do want? Well, fine. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make you their slaves. Okay? Are you happy now? It's crazy. It's just crazy that in chapter 2 and 3, he says, I'm going to let them enslave you so that they can wage war against you so that I can repent you. He tells Israel.
Same thing with Babylon, though. Same thing.
Yeah. But he tells them, I'm going to wage war against you for this so that you'll finally repent and believe me. Mm-hmm. And they don't repent until there's war. And then they cry out, and God gives them a judge, and they're like, oh, phew, praise God. And then the judge leads them to victory, and then they complain.
Rinse, repeat, over and over and over.
Over and over again. I don't see how you can read the book of Judges just as a small, granular example. Read that, and then tell me that we're any different than them. We're just not.
No, we have the same cyclical view of history.
Right.
No.
And
Death and resurrection, if you like.
Exactly. So we lie to ourselves about the myth of progress. We lie and say we're progressive people. We don't have to engage in that kind of violence anymore. We're not going to engage in tribalism anymore. And it's all bad. It's all bad. And yet, where do we come back to over and over again? Tribalism, violence, repentance.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Bonus time episode.
In the church. Same thing. We try to run away from the church, and it comes and finds us every time. So praise Christ. That's all I got to say.
Well, this is why I don't tell the history the way they tell their own history. The congregation. Right. It does aggravate them a little bit, but I'm like,
the golden years, they weren't golden.
Or even just the history of this congregation isn't representative of the history of the faith.
That's true.
Sorry.
Again, just because you're Christians and you show up on Sunday doesn't mean what you're doing is godly. Yeah, that's Protestantism, by the way. That's the myth of Protestantism. Well, we're all here, so the church is here, so Jesus is here.
The supremacy of the third commandment,
right?
And maybe the third and fourth together.
Yeah.
Everything else, well, whatever. A little bit of anger doesn't hurt anybody.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All right, we're coming up on 3 hours on the live cast, so
and
we'll cut her.
Broadcast and